Scientists discovered something Atlantis-like near Australia. There used to be an entire continent that's now underwater. Here's what happened to it. Around 70,000 years ago, during the last ice age, there was a huge landmass called Sahul. It was located in the southwestern Pacific Ocean. This ancient supercontinent connected what we now know as Australia, New Guinea, Tasmania, and the Aru Islands into one giant piece of land. Imagine lush tropical rainforests surrounded by beautiful mountains. Sahul's tallest mountains were in the New Guinea highlands, with peaks reaching over 13,000 feet. This beautiful place was home to a variety of unique animals, most of which were pouched creatures. But back then, they weren't just koalas and kangaroos. Sahul was filled with different types of grazers, burrowers, scavengers, and predators. It was home to a huge diprotodon, a powerful hunter Thiosolio, and a horrifying Miscellaneous, a creature that's much larger than any living lizard today. It was a unique place because the rest of the world was filled with placental animals at the time, like wolves, elephants, and humans. In Sahul, the only normal mammals were bats and rodents. But not all its parts were the same. The Timor, Arafura, and Carpentaria regions were covered by hot savanna and dry forests. It looked kinda like modern Australia, hot air deserts with scrubland, steppe, and temperate forests along the eastern coast. Back then, people were migrating all across the world. They made an incredible journey from Southeast Asia to Sahul and first arrived here from 60 to 45,000 years ago. They mostly traveled by foot and crossed the sea using bamboo rafts and simple boats. They came there from an ancient landmass called Sunda, which includes parts of Southeast Asia. They traveled across a series of islands known as Wallachia and eventually spread across Sahul. And it wasn't a small journey. Sahul was huge, around 4.1 million square miles. That's bigger than the USA or Canada. It stretched from the equator to around the southern part of New Zealand. So they arrived in what is now Australia and became Australia's first people. Scientists think that Sahul had a population of 500,000. We've discovered cave paintings that date back around 40,000 years. It's a hunting scene depicting an anoa, or miniature buffalo, facing figures of humans and animals. Researchers are trying to figure out how these early settlers moved across Sahul and where we might find archaeological evidence of their journey. To do this, they created a landscape evolution model. The simulation showed how Sahul changed between 75,000 and 35,000 years ago. It showed potential migration routes and archaeological sites. Humans likely traveled along coastlines and rivers. But how did Sahul get submerged off the coast of Australia, similar to the mythical Atlantis? During the last ice age, much of the Earth's water was locked up in large ice sheets and glaciers. The sea levels were much lower than they are today. After that, the global temperatures increased. The ice sheets melted and the sea levels rose, flooding the land bridges that once connected different parts of Sahul together. About 8,000 years ago, New Guinea separated from mainland Australia, and then, about 6,000 years ago, Tasmania did the same. We still can explore the underwater parts of Sahul thanks to new technology. Divers explore and collect samples directly from the ocean floor. Underwater drones can go to places that are too deep or dangerous for humans to explore. And with sonar mapping, scientists use sound waves to create maps of the ocean floor. It's like using an echo to see what's underwater. The sound waves bounce off the seabed and come back, helping us create a picture of what it looks like. Deep underwater, archaeologists have found stone tools and other artifacts. They also discovered fossils of animals like Diprotodon and Thylasolio. By studying the underwater terrain of Sahul, they learned about the ancient rivers, lakes, and coastlines that existed during the Ice Age. But Sahul isn't the only underwater continent. Sahul isn't the only hidden gem of Southeast Asia. Take Sundaland, a place made up of Sumatra, Java, Borneo, and some other islands. This place was crazy huge during the Ice Age, but now almost fully underwater. Almost, but not entirely. The parts above the ocean are teeming with life. If you like birds, check this place out. It has almost a fifth of the world's bird species. You can spot colorful birds like the Java hawk eagle and the Bali starling among the lush forests. It's also a home to a fourth of Earth's fish species. Sundaland's waters are a haven for marine life, even the most exotic animals like the Asian arowanas. It's also a treasure trove of flowers. That's where you can find Rafflesia and Titan arum, the world's largest flowers. This makes it very similar to Zealandia. Zealandia is a long, narrow piece of land about half the size of Australia. It broke from Antarctica about 100 million years ago. Just like Sundaland, it isn't fully underwater. 7% of it stayed above sea level. This sticking out little piece is what we now call New Zealand, along with Stewart Island and some smaller islands. These pieces of Zealandia are lush and warm. They're packed with volcanoes, mountain ranges, beautiful natural geysers, and hot springs. Local people, Maori, use these hot springs for cooking. People place corn, eggs, and vegetables in baskets and lower them directly in the hot springs. Sometimes they cook food in a pit oven using heated rocks. Another hidden world is known as Argoland. This mysterious landmass was once part of Australia, back when dinosaurs chilled around. It drove scientists crazy for decades. They knew it existed because it left a huge stretch on the ancient seafloor, the Argo Abyssal Plain. About 155 million years ago, it broke off from Australia, saying bye-bye. The continent drifted somewhere north, and when it reached Southeast Asia, it just vanished. Scientists had no idea where it went, but recently they finally found its remains. Turns out, poor Argoland's lower parts started drowning into the Sunda Trench, a horrifyingly deep oceanic pit. The Earth's crust sunk into the mantle. Meanwhile, the upper parts of Argoland were pushed upward, grabbing the younger rocks on land. Because of this, Argoland broke apart into a bunch of smaller pieces. These pieces formed parts of Borneo, Java, Sulawesi, and other regions. The remains are buried under Indonesia and Myanmar. Imagine a colossal landmass the size of Greenland, Greater Adria. Its journey began about 240 million years ago when it broke away from the supercontinent Gondwana. It started moving north, and after 100 million years of enjoying the warm seas, it suddenly crashed into Europe and shattered into pieces. Most of these pieces went deep into the Earth's mantle, but some were scraped off and became part of mountain ranges like the Alps. Today, the remnants of Greater Adria are scattered across more than 30 countries, from Spain to Iran. That's why they're hard to look for. Seychelles was also once part of Gondwana. Yep, these idyllic islands are sitting atop of the ancient continent. We know a lot about it because of its fascinating granite outcrops. 100 years ago, Alfred Wegener discovered continental drift, but no one believed him. These granite outcrops helped him prove that he's not crazy and that tectonic plates really are moving. The Seychelles broke off from India and Madagascar and eventually became a sad loner in the Indian Ocean. This probably happened because of some insanely active volcanoes in the Deccan Traps. But now, the islands are home to unique species both on land and in the coral reefs nearby. Mauritius broke off from India after the dinosaur wiping. Along its journey, it stretched into a long ribbon-like shape and also broke into pieces. Now it's all scattered beneath the Indian Ocean. Scientists stumbled upon this lost land by studying tiny ancient crystals called zircons. These zircons are like time capsules. They date back an astonishing 660 million to 2 billion years. That's even older than Mauritius itself. These ancient crystals hinted that there's another Atlantis somewhere nearby. Turns out there are hidden continents all around the world, and maybe we'll discover more of them in the future.
See this place on the map? Yeah, right there. It's estimated that around 100 people have vanished or lost their lives here. Why, you ask? Well, it seems they were all looking for this guy, Percy Fawcett. He was a British colonel, famous for his sharp blue eyes, perfectly groomed beard, and signature hat. He looked like a character from Pride and Prejudice, but lived more like Indiana Jones. In fact, this character was inspired by Fawcett's story. But his disappearance in 1925 was more macabre than any movie plot. Colonel Fawcett was bold. Not the ask your neighbor's Wi-Fi password kind of bold. I'm talking full-on, I don't care that much about my life bold. He used to be a soldier in Sri Lanka and even did a secret spy gig in Morocco, but he needed more. So in 1906, Fawcett started exploring parts of Brazil and Bolivia where no one had dared to go before. His mission was to create secret, mind-blowing maps. Okay, that doesn't sound too risky, but trust me, it was. If you want to explore the world nowadays, you just open Google Earth and, well, that's it. No danger, no adrenaline, just maybe one or two creepy street view photos. Ew. But we're talking about the beginning of the 20th century, when satellites and this weird Google car didn't exist. Back then, if you wanted to fill in the world map, you actually had to explore the land on foot. So that's how Colonel Fawcett ended up in South America. And he became famous for his expeditions to map out the wild Amazon. He was the first guy to record the locations of waterfalls in that region, for example. But then he got obsessed. Blame it on lack of sleep or whatever sketchy Amazon jungle juice he was sipping, but suddenly he was like, I'll bet there's an ancient advanced city hidden somewhere around here. Spoiler alert, there wasn't. But he was hooked on that idea. Hanging out with native Indians for so long convinced him that large groups could totally thrive in the middle of a massive rainforest. And of course, Fawcett loved a good old adventure story, especially the ones from the 16th and 17th centuries, written by European explorers. In those stories, adventurers claimed they had found huge settlements and fine roadways deep in the heart of Latin America. But Fawcett's all-time favorite story came from a manuscript written in 1753. Back then, adventurers were hunting for precious metals in Brazil when they stumbled upon a ruined city with monumental buildings, roads, and plazas. Oh, and every corner had a Roman-style spire. Naturally, the colonel was all in to find it. Too bad no one told him this manuscript is mostly considered a forgery. Yep, this story is as real as Snow White's. But then, things got weird. The settlement described in that manuscript was supposedly located in the northeast side of Brazil. But now, he's saying there's an advanced civilization in Mato Grosso, which is in a different part of the country. So he decided to name this new place the City of Z. Back in the 1920s, the colonel launched 2 separate expeditions to find it, but both trips failed, as he faced terrible weather, fever, and of course, exhaustion. Now, tell me in the comments, what do you think Fawcett did after 2 failed expeditions? Option A, he quit. Option B, he called his mom. Option C, he tried again because he didn't get the memo that the universe is clearly saying stop. Well, of course, option C is the right answer. This is relentless Fawcett we're talking about. So, 3 years later, the colonel finally gathered enough cash to launch yet another expedition in search of the City of Z. All he needed was a crew of people crazy enough to join him. Famous and experienced explorers were begging to come along. But nope, Fawcett decided to take his son and his best buddy instead. In January 1925, this brave trio set off on their journey. They packed mosquito nets, canned food, and made a promise, we shall return. Another spoiler alert, they didn't. Uh-oh. The journey kicked off in New Jersey, and then they sailed all the way to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. There, they stopped to grab some pack animals, like horses, and hired a couple of local guides. Now they were ready to head to the city of Cuiabá. Now keep in mind the distances in Brazil are crazy huge. So this little journey was like traveling from Miami to Chicago on foot. 3 months later, they finally ventured into the jungle for the first time. And that's when the fun really began. The crew faced piranha-infested rivers, an endless maze of thick trees, and the worst part, bugs. The constant annoying zzz of a gazillion mosquitoes wouldn't let them sleep, and Fawcett's best friend's foot got huge from tick bites. But the colonel didn't have time to babysit his friend's princess foot. Oh no, he was too obsessed to take a break. In fact, at some point, he was so far ahead of his companions that he had to camp alone for a night. On May 29th, Fawcett finally came to his senses. There was no city of Z. But did he let that stop him? Not really. He unpacked their gear and sent the local guides back to Cuba. But before saying a final goodbye, he asked them to deliver a letter to his wife, saying something like, "Don't worry, hon, our son is well and getting stronger every day." Sure he was. Anyway, after this dramatic farewell, the trio set off into the bush alone. The darkness swallowed the thick forest, and then they were never seen again. Okay, that was intense, so let's fast forward. 2 years later, the newspapers were still speculating whether the trio could still be alive, and Fawcett became a legend, like Bigfoot, but less hairy. One guy said that the colonel had become one of the locals and was living his happily ever after in the jungle. Another guy said he was held prisoner by the Indians, but no one could confirm any of these sightings. It wasn't until 1928 that the British authorities finally thought better late than never and decided to look for Fawcett and his crew. By that time, they were sure their expedition had perished, but they still needed proof. And after days and days of surviving the jungle's worst nightmares, they found, well, nothing. But in a weird way, this mystery inspired more explorers to look for them. It's estimated that about 100 people have passed away in this process, and a few have followed in the explorers' footsteps by disappearing without a trace. So, what really happened to the expedition? Researchers have pointed their fingers at everything under the sun: parasitic infections, starvation, drowning, jaguar attacks, you name it. Some even say Fawcett dove headfirst into mysticism and started an occult community in the jungle. The Brazilian anthropologist Orlando Vilas-Boas was probably the one who got the closest to solving this case. Back in the 1950s, he was working with the Kalapalo Indians when they suddenly admitted to, getting rid of Fawcett. They even had bones to prove it. But it turns out a forensic analysis showed that the remains didn't belong to the colonel. So we're back to square one, and nobody knows, to this day, whatever the heck happened to them. Fawcett's quest, as we know it today, is based on some pretty questionable sources. But there is a possibility that he wasn't living in Delulu land after all. Recent discoveries suggest that his idea of a sophisticated jungle city wasn't just pure fantasy. In 2024, a massive ancient city was found in the Amazon, hidden beneath dense vegetation. Evidence suggests it was built around 2,500 years ago, and it was surprisingly advanced, featuring houses and plazas, all connected by an incredible network of roads and canals. But this city was in a forest in Ecuador, not Brazil. So who knows? Maybe the legendary city of Z is still out there. Ooh.
A bridge, a very helpful structure that traces back to the Neolithic times. The oldest bridge in the world, at least the one that is still standing, is the Arcadico Bridge, built more than 3,000 years ago. But there's a river you cannot cross using a bridge: the Amazon River, the largest and longest river in the world. Okay, the Nile River is actually the longest river in the world, but the Amazon wants both titles for itself. The Amazon River is born in Peru and crosses Colombia and Brazil until it reaches a massive delta at the Atlantic Ocean. Its waters travel a longer distance than Frodo and Sam, and yet not a single bridge has ever been built over it. Why is that? First of all, seasonal floods change the size of the river. During dry seasons, the Amazon is about 3 miles wide, but during heavy rains, it can get up to 30 miles wide in a few weeks. Not only that, but the flood also makes the river change its position. Now imagine trying to build a bridge in a place where the ground turns into water for about 4 months. Not an impossible task, but not the easiest one either. Now, if you look back at your geography classes, you might remember that the soil of the riverbank can be very soft, especially in the Amazon, which means it can erode and shift. Heavy rains also create marshes, a type of wetlands that actually reduces the magnitude of the floods and purifies the water. It's also home to many animals. This means that to build a bridge, part of this wetland would have to be drained, which would ruin the lives of all those animals. Besides, the foundations of said bridge would have to be deep, and that would cost a lot of money. The rain creates yet another problem for the potential bridge. It increases the river's water level by 13 to almost 50 feet. Of course, bridges have been built in deep rivers before, like the Padma Bridge, a gigantic structure with a foundation of 417 feet. But because the soil of the Amazon River can erode easily, a bridge would have to be built using floating structures, known as pontoons, and they're not helpful in a river that changes depth whenever it feels like it. Next on our list of things that are a problem to human endeavors is the Amazon rainforest. This forest spreads over 9 countries and is so big and so dense it could cover about half of Europe. This means that a bridge would almost likely connect one patch of the forest to another. A pointless improvement to the lives of capybaras and jaguars. Of course, the real users of such a bridge would be humans. Most people live around the tributaries of the Amazon River, not around the river itself, because who wants to live like a beaver at a dam? There's even a state called Amapá on the left side of the Amazon River that is completely cut off from the rest of Brazil. You could easily take your car and visit its neighbor, a place called French Guiana. But if you wanted to go to another part of Brazil, you'd have to find other means of transportation. Aside from small riverside populations that live right on the riverside, of the Amazon, bigger cities were built near tributary rivers, like the Rio Negro, which has a bridge, by the way, and the Nanay River in Peru. The bridges that go over the Nanay and the Rio Negro are the only 2 bridges over the rivers in the Amazon basin. The lack of good roads and highways inside the Amazon also makes the creation of bridges a pointless endeavor. Back in the 70s, humans had big ideas on how to explore the Amazon ever more, which is why they decided to build a highway which would cut the Amazon basin from left to right. The road, called the Trans-Amazonian Highway, was supposed to bring people to the heart of the Amazon. But it seems like the difficulties of building more than 2,000 miles of road inside a dense rainforest were not foreseen. Halfway through, the project was abandoned because it was super expensive and problematic. Nowadays, highways in the Amazon basin are always flooded, filled with holes and mud. This whole situation creates a ripple effect. People don't live near the river because it's hard to access it. The roads don't go there either, because it's hard to build them. Which in turn makes even fewer people want to settle on the banks of the Amazon River, because they have no roads to get them there. So, if there are no roads and no bridges, how do people live there? You're not gonna believe this, but the riverside population uses a very old but reliable invention called a boat. The Amazon River is fully navigable, and the people that live there use it like a road. Much like motorcycles, cars, and buses, the Amazon River has canoes, speedboats, and ferries. There's even a very specific ferry called Obidense, transporting people to the municipality of Óbidos, hence the name. Locals do everything on boats. They even have a boat hospital that floats around and visits riverside populations, and a boat bank, so you can do all your bank-related things while looking at the vastness of the Amazon. Honestly, genius invention. The downside to this lack of bridges is that it stops us from exploring the truly hidden gems of the world. In the Amazon, for example, there are over 10,000 undiscovered archaeological sites. We may never be able to dig out stuff like fortified villages, geoglyphs, and many other structures. It would be pretty neat to go full-on Lara Croft in the middle of the Amazon, but these findings are tucked deep in the heart of the forest. At the same time, only on a boat are you able to witness the crazy phenomenon of the unmixed waters of the Rio Negro and the Solimões on the Amazon River. For more than 3 miles, these 2 tributaries of the Amazon River flow side by side without mixing. The speed and the temperature of these waters are different, so you'll see a river that looks like coffee and Coca-Cola mixed. This awesome phenomenon is called the meeting of waters. But the Amazon River is not the only river in the world deemed bridgeless. The Congo River, the second longest river in Africa, only has one bridge crossing it. The two Congos, yes, there are two different countries in the world named Congo, are separated by the Congo River, and so far, no roads connect them. Also, fun fact, some geologists believe that back when Gondwana existed and the continents were all cuddled together, the Amazon and the Congo River were one river connected to each other. Another place with a lack of bridges is the east side of the Thames in London. The west side of the river is narrower, which makes building a bridge easier. There are about 33 bridges on the west side alone, but if you want to cross the river from the east side, it's gonna be a hassle. The thing is, back in the 1800s, shipping companies decided that building too many bridges over the Thames was too expensive, because this was a shipping route and the bridges would have to be taller than usual. The structure would also have to be long, since some parts of the Thames are about 1,870 feet wide. But building long bridges is not a problem per se. In Rio de Janeiro, for example, you can find the Rio Niterói Bridge, which is about 8.26 miles long. Back when it was built in the 70s, it was the second longest bridge in the world. The bridge is so long that in 2018, a girl was born while her mother was crossing it, and now the birthplace in her birth certificate is literally the bridge. There's also no U-turn on it, so if you drive onto the bridge by mistake, you're in for a long drive. So next time you feel like exploring the Amazon, remember to pack your own boat. Hobbits might actually exist in real life, but these tiny people don't live in cozy, round homes built into hills like in The Lord of the Rings. They're probably on an isolated island in Indonesia, climbing mountains and hiding in dense forests. Hold up, are they even human? Well, the place we're talking about is the island of Flores, a paradise-like spot in the Indian Ocean. Today, it's famous for being home to the Komodo dragon, the largest lizard in the world. But in the past, it was also home to a very small human species, known as Homo floresiensis. In 2003, experts excavated a cave called Leong Bois and found over 100 fossils of this species. This discovery was huge because it completely challenged our understanding of human history. I mean, previously, most experts thought that Homo sapiens, aka our species, were the only ones that had managed to travel beyond the Southeast Asian mainland towards New Guinea and Australia. But if that's true, how did these ancestors get to Flores Island? Before you answer by boat, let me just say that it's very unlikely that an ancient human species could have created vessels strong and big enough to cross the ocean. Maybe they swam there or even teleported. Jokes aside, the truth is we still don't know exactly how or when Homo floresiensis ended up over there. A recent study suggests they might have descended from Homo erectus, one of the first human-like species we know of. According to this theory, they probably traveled 450 miles east from an island called Java and made it to Flores about 1 million years ago. Once living isolated in Flores, their bodies shrank over the years and they ended up becoming really short. But that's just one theory, and there isn't much solid evidence to back it up yet. What we can say for sure is that they were really short compared to modern humans. At first, we thought they'd be about 3 feet 6 inches tall. But that changed in 2016 when experts found new fossils, including a tiny arm bone and some teeth that showed they were even smaller, about 2.4 inches shorter to be exact. These hobbits also had a very small skull and a tiny brain, about a third the size of ours. They had wide hips and shoulders, short legs, and big, flat feet. Overall, their bones were so small that at first, experts thought they might belong to kids. But nope. Since they had wisdom teeth, it was clear they were definitely dealing with adult skeletons. Very small adults, though. Because of their tiny and curious appearance, the media started calling this ancient species the real-life hobbit, just like the characters created by J.R.R. Tolkien, You know, Lord of the Rings. Frodo Baggins? Anyway, why were they so small? There are two main theories. The first one, they weren't a different species at all. Some experts believe they could actually be Homo sapiens, just like you and me, but with a condition that causes the brain to develop smaller, kinda like microcephaly. However, many specialists rejected this idea because the anatomy of people with these kinds of growth conditions today doesn't really match what we see in the little people from Flores. Moving on. The second theory is something people call island dwarfism. Basically, when large animals live on isolated islands, they tend to get smaller because the food supply is limited. For example, there's this dwarf elephant that lived in Sicily and Malta a long time ago, and it only measured about 3 feet tall. Meanwhile, its relative on the European mainland was about 13 feet tall. With a pocket-sized body, these animals need less food, which means they have a better chance of surviving on an island. Another factor that leads to this type of dwarfism is that these animals don't have to worry about defending themselves from large predators. I mean, if you're on an isolated island with no lions or tigers around, there is really no need to be huge. So this could be what happened to the Hobbit people. Studies show they lived in Indonesia at least 100,000 to about 50,000 years ago. But after surviving for so long, these short people mysteriously disappeared. It's possible that they vanished after 8 massive volcanic eruptions hit that region. This idea came up after researchers found a thick layer of volcanic ash right above where the fossils were first found. Even with this evidence, no one can say for sure if the eruptions were the reason for their disappearance. And recently, an anthropologist questioned this theory by saying they might still be alive today. Wait, what? It sounds crazy, but he actually talked to dozens of local people who believe they've seen a tiny hobbit-like man in the flesh on the remote island of Flores. In fact, mysterious stories about sightings have been told long before the remains of Homo floresiensis were even discovered. So it's not like they made up these stories after hearing about the fossils. At least 30 people living there claim they've seen, with their own eyes, a creature that is halfway between an ape and a human. It had an ape-like face and was definitely smaller and hairier than a person, but it walked completely upright with both feet on the ground, just like a human. Locals call it Laihoa. But what should we call it? I mean, can this creature be our famous Homo floresiensis? Well, maybe. Anthropologist Gregory Forth has been working on the island of Flores since the 80s, and he says the locals' descriptions are strangely similar to what we imagine these ancient, short humans might have been like. You might be wondering if the Laihoa is just a legend, like a campfire story meant to scare people. And yeah, some of the descriptions definitely seem to go against basic science. Some people say that after they saw the creature, it just flew off or disappeared like magic. But the researcher points out that a lot of locals also gave very detailed physical descriptions of the creature. Sure, the details varied a bit, which is pretty normal with different people witnessing the same thing, but they didn't mention anything about the creature having crazy superpowers. Now, Forth is starting to wonder if we really are the only species of humans left on the planet. They could be, in fact, real-life hobbits, and that brings us back to a question from earlier in the video. Are they even human? Maybe yes, maybe no. It is possible that the creature spotted on the island of Flores is actually an uncontacted population of modern humans, but it could also be an unknown species of monkey. However, since there's no other evidence for either of these ideas, the best guess right now is that a creature similar to an ape man could still be out there. Okay, but if this creature shares the planet with us, how come no one's ever taken a photo of it? Well, the ape man is part of that island, just like other rare creatures like Komodo dragons. And unlike Bigfoot believers, locals probably don't go out actively searching for this creature. According to the anthropologist, they have no reason, financial, social, or otherwise, to find an ape man. And since they're mostly unaware of scientific research, or any theories saying these creatures don't exist, they don't really care about trying to prove the scientific world wrong. Forth wrapped up his research in 2018, but the anthropologist says that since then, other people have seen the strange creature walking around the island of Flores. 2 young guys from the UK went there, mostly for a snorkeling trip. But at some point, they hiked up a mountain and saw something that really looked like the ape man. So, who knows? Maybe you'll also get a chance to see the real hobbit when you visit Indonesia. A heavy snowstorm rolls in, and then you hear it. A distinct sound of thunder and see lightning sparkling in the sky. Congrats! You're one of the rare people who has witnessed thunder snow. Until recently, scientists couldn't even agree that it's a real thing. But now, as they see more and more videos of it popping up online, they're trying to understand how it forms and how dangerous it really is. One thing is for sure, if you see lightning during a snowstorm, there's at least half a foot of snow falling somewhere nearby. We can even predict heavy snowfalls by thunder snow, but it doesn't work the other way around. Not every heavy snowfall causes thunder snow, and scientists are still wondering why. They think this beautiful natural event happens in a way that's kind of similar to summer storms. Turbulence in the air makes warm, moist air near the ground rise up into the sky. As it goes up, it cools down and forms clouds filled with tiny ice crystals, supercooled water, and soft hail called graupel. When these things crash around inside the cloud, they create an electrical charge, which leads to lightning and thunder. When it's cold enough for snow, the atmosphere doesn't have as much energy as it does in the summer. That's because the ground doesn't heat up as much in the winter, so there's less warmth and moisture in the air. So, there's less supercooled water in the clouds compared to a summer storm. When the right conditions do occur, it usually happens near the Great Lakes in the United States. In places like this, the cold air above mixes with the warm water from the lakes. This big difference in temperature creates areas where the air rises quickly, and those rising pockets can cause lightning and thunder during heavy lake-effect snowstorms. They're also more common in the Colorado Front Range and Upper Great Plains. Another difference between thunder snow and a regular summer storm is that it's much harder to spot thunder snow. Snow absorbs sound waves, so you can only hear thunder if you're within a few miles of it. It will be more like a low rumble than a loud, sharp bang, and it's harder to see a flash of lightning against the backdrop of a bright white sky filled with flurries. This way, thunder snow can catch you off guard and strike just like any lightning. Although, lightning and thunder that come with a snowstorm are usually less frequent and less intense than those that come with summer storms. So, perhaps the worst thing that comes with thunder snow is those heavy snowfalls that can cause chaos on the roads and leave you without power for days. Another cool and rare winter weather phenomenon is the snow donut. You won't want to eat this donut as it looks like snowy wheels or tires. You can mostly find these rare natural snow shapes in the open prairies of North America or some remote places in Northern Europe. They need the perfect mix of conditions to form. First, there needs to be a layer of wet snow on the ground. The surface has to be something the wet snow can't stick to, like ice or very soft, powdery snow. Then, a strong but gentle wind or gravity on a hill has to push the snow just right. As the snow moves, it rolls up like a carpet and forms a big donut with a hole in the middle. Ever heard of the red lightning called sprites? Unlike regular lightning that strikes down from the clouds to the ground, they shoot up high into the atmosphere, about 50 miles above Earth. They're super fast, lasting just a tiny moment, so they're really hard to spot or study. Sprites happen because of a buildup of electricity in clouds, just like normal lightning. They're usually red and can look like jellyfish or carrots and get up to 30 miles wide. Pilots flying in high-altitude planes get the best views, and you can't see it from the ground. Scientists think sprites could happen on other planets with atmospheres. They tested this idea in a lab by recreating those planets' atmospheres and running electricity through them. It turned out they were right. A fall streak hole is a big circular or oval-shaped gap that sometimes appears in certain clouds. These types of clouds float high up in the sky and are often made of tiny water droplets that are colder than freezing, but they haven't frozen yet. They need ice crystals to freeze. When a plane flies through the cloud, it can bring those ice crystals into the cloud. Once they're there, the water droplets freeze quickly, get bigger, and start to fall from the cloud. This creates a hole in the cloud, and as more nearby droplets freeze, the hole gets bigger and spreads outward. A mini tornado that spins up a lot of dust and dirt on a hot day is called a dust devil. They're little whirlwinds filled with dust and debris, and they can happen all over the world. They're smaller and not as strong as tornadoes, but they can still be powerful enough to knock over small objects or lift light things into the air. In really hot desert areas, they can grow much taller and last longer, sometimes for over an hour. Dust devils form on sunny days when the ground gets super hot. Once the dust devil is spinning fast enough, it acts like a chimney, with hot air rising up and cooler air sinking down through the middle. Dust devils can be dangerous if they're strong enough, so it's best to stay out of their way. Have you ever seen a fog bow? They form in a similar way to regular colorful rainbows, but they're much wider. Fog bows are made by tiny droplets in fog or clouds instead of big raindrops like in regular rainbows, but they also appear opposite the sun. You need to look for a fog bow in a thin fog when the sun is bright. You might catch one when the sun starts to shine through the fog, or if you're near the ocean, where fog often forms. Because the water droplets in the fog are so tiny, fog bows don't have the regular bright rainbow colors. They might even look all white or faint. Some fog bows are hard to see at first because they blend into the mist, but once you spot them, they're easy to recognize. There are atmospheric rivers flowing high up in the sky. They're long, thin streams of air in the atmosphere that carry a lot of water vapor. Even though you can't see them, they sometimes hold as much water as the Mississippi River carries in one day. When these sky rivers reach land, the water vapor inside them often turns into rain or snow. Some are gentle and helpful, bringing much-needed water to dry areas. But the really big and powerful ones can cause heavy rainstorms or snowstorms. If they stop moving over certain areas, they can lead to flooding, mudslides, and other problems. One famous atmospheric river is called the Pineapple Express. It gets its name because it pulls warm, wet air all the way from tropical areas near Hawaii to places like the US West Coast. Mimetis clouds are some of the strangest and coolest ones in the sky, looking like big, fluffy pouches or bubbles. Their shape can change a lot. Some look like smooth bubbles and others stretch out like long tubes. Mimetis clouds usually form under big clouds. Inside these storm clouds, strong winds cause turbulence, which pushes air and moisture downward instead of upward like regular clouds. This creates those uneven, pouchy shapes. Because mimetis clouds are connected to powerful storm clouds, they're often a sign of bad weather, like heavy rain, hail, or lightning. In the winter, if it's cold enough, they can sometimes bring snow. Sometimes they appear with other, calmer clouds, but that's pretty rare. The best time to see mimetis clouds is when the sun is low in the sky, like at sunrise or sunset. The sunlight lights up the pouches, making them glow and look even more amazing.
Stonehenge took approximately 20 million man-hours to build. For comparison, an average human doesn't live much over 700,000 hours. This is Jack, one of the first builders of Stonehenge. Let's say Jack lived to be 80 years old, which is extremely improbable, but it makes it easier for me to crunch the numbers, thanks. If Jack had spent his entire life, from age 0 to age 80, working on the Stonehenge project, it would have required approximately 28.5 generations of people doing the same thing to complete it. That's next to impossible. To make it more plausible, let's multiply that by 2. After all, Jack wouldn't want to dedicate his entire life to moving stones, and he didn't live to be that old. Thus, we arrive at around 57 generations needed to build Stonehenge. That's not enough room on the screen for me to introduce John, Jack's great-great-great-great, you get the drift, grandson. So it all began around 5,000 years ago with just a simple circular earthen bank and ditch. Fast forward to around 26,000 BCE, and the builders replaced that initial structure with a complex arrangement of wooden posts and brought in around 80 dolerite bloom stones from Wales, which were rearranged at least 3 times. Then, a few hundred years later, they added those massive sarsen stones, each weighing around 25 tons. These enormous sandstone blocks were transported about 19 miles to create a continuous outer circle, with 5 trilithons, 2 upright stones topped with a lintel, forming a horseshoe shape inside. It was a millennium-long building process that demanded years of hard work. So, people must have lived nearby, right? But how would they have found shelter back then? Today, we have houses for builders on site, small accommodations that serve as temporary housing. But structures like this definitely didn't exist when Stonehenge was constructed, did they? Well, actually, they existed, and some recent archaeological digs near Stonehenge prove it. Archaeologists found this Stone Age eco-home, which is a huge deal since it's one of the earliest settlements in the area. This newly uncovered Mesolithic home dates back to around the year 4300 BCE. Let's take a closer look at this house, shall we? Now, for the walls, people back then used a large fallen tree, its trunk to be more precise. These wooden walls were reinforced with flint, and they even lined the pit left by the uprooted tree with cobblestones. To create the roof, they opted for animal hides, which sounds like a wise choice. They must have provided protection against the unpredictable weather of the British Isles. Now, you might be wondering, the weather in Britain is indeed unpredictable, and it has been that way since time immemorial. So, how did the builders manage throughout most of the year, particularly during the winter months? Well, the answer is simple. There was a hearth on site, which isn't surprising, but the system they employed was quite ingenious. A hearth inside the house would have posed too great a risk, yet bringing hot stones into the dwelling was perfectly safe. While they were hot, they couldn't ignite the building. So they used these stones from the hearth as a heat storage system to keep warm at night. And as a final touch, they even incorporated various stones for decoration. They didn't exactly get a Pinterest house, but it added a touch of elegance for sure. And if you think this discovery is merely about the houses, think again. It significantly changes our understanding of how people lived during that time. This discovery places them in an important prehistoric setting right at the start of the Neolithic area, sparking some interesting questions about whether these early folks could be related to the people who built Stonehenge. But there's a big worry. Experts are concerned that this significant find, along with other buried archaeological sites, could be at risk if the authorities go ahead with plans to build a tunnel to reroute the A303 away from the World Heritage Site. Sure thing the house the scientists found wasn't in perfect shape, and it lacked some crucial elements people use for living. Some of them decayed over time, while others were simply absent. So the scientists took 20 tons of chalk, 5,000 hazel rods, and 3 tons of straw, and used all this to recreate the 4,500-year-old design houses. These new buildings are located close to Stonehenge, which is incredible since in this area, planning permission for even a new cowshed is problematic. So, what are these houses like? Well, first off, there are 4 of them, and they're oval-shaped. They're built on the foundation of real houses that stood there about 4,500 years ago, just around the time the Stonehenge Eco House was going up. The houses aren't very big, they're single-room structures. When it comes to dimensions, it was straightforward to estimate since we could gauge the size of the roof and the height of the walls based on the foundations. Each side measures about 16 feet. However, the roof structure remains a bit of a mystery. There were a few differing thatching techniques back then, so pinpointing the exact method used for these dwellings is kind of a guessing game. For now, we think it involves knotted or tied straw carefully secured onto a hazel-woven frame. When fires are lit, The smoke from the hearth wafts up through the thatched roof. Now, remember those 20 tons of chalk? That was needed for the floors and walls. The white chalk walls and floors reflect sunlight and capture heat from the fire. But here's the kicker. The builders encountered a challenge because the ground was so waterlogged that some of the chalk floors took weeks to dry out. By the time they should have been bone dry, they were still as sticky as chewing gum. Now, it's safe to say people 4,500 years ago faced similar struggles, and we can really appreciate what they went through while building their homes. The final layer of daub was applied using rags, giving a smooth, almost shiny finish that looks surprisingly classy. The interiors are furnished with wooden and wicker beds and shelves, along with clay pots and jars, all centered around a cozy hearth. The spaces feel surprisingly roomy and are filled with light that streams in through the thatched roof, bouncing off those white walls. Plus, the woven furniture adds a nice touch of authenticity to the vibe. The fires have been lit, and the first meal, bread crafted from flour ground on a stone mill next to the hearth, has been prepared. Those who tried the bread were pleasantly surprised by its flavor, finding it quite tasty. Now, here comes the bummer. Those who recreated the houses did cheat a little. While the materials used were authentic, the tools weren't. They used cement mixers to mix the daub, wheelbarrows to transport the timber, and logs by the hearth were split with steel axes instead of stone ones. Still, the builders aren't professionals, they're volunteers. So I think a bit of cheating is totally cool in this case. There are other volunteers on site who are more than happy to chat about the daily activities of the Stonehenge builders, from grinding grain with a quern to making rope from rushes. But these houses and the Eco House aren't the only remarkable things in the Stonehenge area. Some years ago, archaeologists uncovered a burial site close to Stonehenge that predates the monument itself. This Neolithic long barrow, dating back approximately 56 to 5,700 years, likely contains the remains of some of Britain's earliest inhabitants. The burial site was identified through aerial images that revealed its distinct shape beneath the crops. Salisbury Plain is rich with ancient sites, including Stonehenge, various mounds, and monuments. The area has remained undisturbed over the centuries, which is likely why so many ancient structures are still intact. This discovery also shows a significant shift in human lifestyle during that era, marking a transition from a nomadic existence to settled farming and animal husbandry, much like the Eco House itself. The long barrow in question measures about 85 feet long and 65 feet wide, though much of its above-ground structure has been lost to farming over the years. If this site is like others in the vicinity, it contains the remains of 30 to 50 individuals, along with cow skulls, which were significant to those early communities. Being afraid of the ocean is a very understandable fear. We have it in our genes. In the past, humans had to avoid certain dangerous situations, like big animals and deep bodies of water, in order to survive. Plus, we've only explored 5% of the oceans, so we never know what we can stumble upon there. In regular conditions, GoPro is just a camera. But if you find it lying at the bottom of a 400-foot pit in the middle of the Caribbean Sea, that will make your blood run cold. I know 400 feet may not seem like much, but a person who is deep diving for fun usually can swim from 59 to 98 feet deep only, unless they're a professional diver. But say you made it to that pit and retrieved that GoPro. That would have still been fatal to you. In this specific hole where the camera was found, there would be a layer of hydrogen sulfide, a very dangerous and foul-smelling gas, at the mark of 300 feet. The gadget was 100 feet lower, alongside its owners, two long-lost explorers. To this day, very few people manage to dive this deep and go back unscraped. In fact, the deceased explorers were found only with the help of submarines. Now, you might be curious about the content of the GoPro. In stories like this, we expect proof of foul play or sinister footage. But the only thing found there were the images of happy times the explorers had during their trip. A sad ending to a vacay. Now, in deep waters, you can also find many species that seem to be otherworldly, but in a cute and interesting way, like the alien sponge. This fun little fella is a sponge first seen near the Mariana Trench in 2016. It's actually part of an ecosystem dubbed Forest of the Weird. Okay, this makes it sound a bit creepy. And what adds to the weirdness is the fact that the alien sponge had two little holes that resemble little eyes, so like it's peeking at you. Another fun fact? The skeleton of this type of sponge is made of glass. And if you're afraid of cockroaches, I'll let you take a deep breath here. Ready? Cool. Because on the ocean floor, there are more than 20 different types of giant isopods, beetle lookalikes, that can be as big as 14 inches. Yikes! But fear not, these guys usually roam the ocean floor for food. So, unless you dive 7,000 feet, which we've just seen is not possible, you won't run into them. Now, despite the horror movie name, the bloody belly comb jelly is actually a fascinating creature you can also find in the ocean. They live in the twilight zone of the ocean, which is between 820 and 4,900 feet below sea level. Pretty far from where you usually soak your feet. But what's so cool about this jelly is its color. Because in the twilight zone, the light is very scarce. Many animals either emit a faint glow, like the anglerfish, or create a camouflage. The jelly here is blood red because, in the pitch-black darkness of the ocean, other animals won't see a digesting, colorful, bioluminescent prey inside its stomach. Besides, the jelly has a row of combs that spark a very beautiful iridescent light. Beautiful and lethal. Humans also have their fair share of contribution to the weird fest that is the ocean floor. Depending on where you swim, you might just find parts of rocket engines used during the Apollo program. Now, when a rocket is launched into space, parts of it are dropped into the ocean where it runs out of propellant, making the rocket itself lighter. And a part of the Apollo 11 rocket engine, yes, that one that first took humans to land on the moon, was actually recovered from the ocean after more than 4 decades, and you can see it at the Museum of Flight in Seattle. Not a space fan? Well, there's something for the Oregon Trail lovers too. There are 2 locomotives living their best lives, or worst, depending on your point of view, just off the coast of New Jersey. They're from the 1850s and are sitting under 90 feet of water. They probably fell off of a transportation ship during a rough storm, or were intentionally pushed over the barge so that the ship didn't sink. Most of these things can only be seen while diving, but worry not. Even if you have a lingering fear of the deep ocean, you can still find weird things by simply walking on the beach. Look at these bizarre Garfield landline phones washed away in Brittany, France. The French have been having bizarre encounters with the sarcastic orange cat since the 80s, and it took about 30 years for French farmer René Morvan to come forward with a simple explanation. A shipping container with Garfield merchandise got stranded in the sea, only to find its final resting place in a sea cave. We bet Brittany locals are still haunted by the creepy smile of that landline phone. And just like a storm uncovered the Garfield secret stash, it also moved a few ships that sank more than 600 years ago. But this is not a simple Titanic story. It actually sounds more like Pirates of the Caribbean, because when the storm moved those old ships, authorities from Caesarea found 2,000 gold coins, some silver and bronze coins, gemstones, and rings. It was a bigger treasure than a dragon could hoard. But don't get your hopes up. Even though most of the underwater archaeological zones in this region are open to divers, these treasures are safely tucked away in a museum. Speaking of pirates, and I was, another weird thing you can find chillin' in the ocean is the pirate city of Port Royal, Jamaica. In 1692, the city was devastated by an earthquake, followed by a tsunami. A really bad twofer. But the good news is, you can still visit it today, well, scuba diving, that is. This is actually not the only sunken city in the world. There's also Thonis Heracleion in Egypt, which is not at the bottom of the sea per se, but at the mouth of the Nile River. There's also Baiae, a Roman town built atop a supervolcano. Now, you might be thinking Baiae had the same fate as Pompeii, but guess what? The floor actually sank and the town went down with it. So, have you ever heard of underwater crop circles? Back in 1995, divers in Japan spotted perfectly round circles formed in the sand. They were 6 feet in diameter and looked like those crop circles from sci-fi movies. Scientists simply couldn't figure out what or who did it until they caught the culprit red-handed, a tiny male pufferfish only 4 inches long. This little guy uses its body and fins to draw circles and squiggles and decorates his creation with seashells and corals. It takes the fish about a week to do so. All this hard work is part of a mating ritual, and if a female pufferfish likes the art, she will lay her eggs there, right in the center. The circular design of the underwater crop circle actually channels fresh water to the middle of the circle, the ideal scenario for the eggs to develop. And guess what? After she lays the eggs, the female pufferfish leaves, and it's the male that tends the eggs. But just in case fishes are not your thing, we can also offer you a cargo of rubber duckies, turtles, beavers, and frogs, 28,000 of them to be exact. These bath toys were traveling from China to the US, but much like our friend Garfield, were caught in a storm in 1992. From the North Pacific, our friendly duckies and beavers made their way to the UK by 2007. But some were bolder and traveled to Australia, Indonesia, Chile, Hawaii, and even Alaska. Now, have you ever seen a strange thing washed up by the beach? Let us know in the comments. Bye.
I guess it's no surprise that it's not that easy to just hop on a plane and literally fly to the South Pole, aka Antarctica. Sure, there are airports down there, but they're not really set up for commercial flights. So most people go to Punta Arenas International Airport in southern Patagonia, Chile, and then take a boat if they want to see some penguins. But not only is it hard to fly there, it's even harder to fly over there. When you're cruising at 30,000 feet, you probably don't think much about what's happening below. But it's pretty unusual for flights to go directly over the South Pole, and planes flying across Antarctica are quite rare too. Technically, it is possible. I've already mentioned that there are airports there. But even so, the infrastructure down there is still super limited. There simply aren't enough airports or refueling stations to support regular commercial flights, making it tricky to operate in such a remote area. Plus, there are only a handful of specialized cargo and transport flights that go in and out, and they exist to cater to those few folks who actually live in Antarctica. Then there's the weather that drives up the costs. The simplest example is that the pilots there need special training, which costs money, which is all because of the weather. Another hurdle is something called ETOPS. These rules dictate how far twin-engine planes can fly from an airport. Since there are so few airports in Antarctica, it's tough for pilots to stick to these regulations. Historically, ETOPS made it next to impossible to fly close to or over the South Pole, while flights over land have plenty of airports to choose from. Antarctica is a whole different ballgame. These days, some aircraft can fly up to 330 minutes or, in rare cases, even 370 minutes from an airport. But even with those extended limits, certain parts of the airspace above Antarctica are still off-limits. Still, in the grand scheme of things, that might not be a huge deal. The most curious of you must have Googled that already and found out that there really are Antarctic airways. Please do not judge fast, and don't say I wasn't right saying how hard it was to fly to the South Pole. Let me break it down for you. Antarctic Airways advertise as the world's most exclusive transcontinental flight, but don't think you can just waltz in and book a ticket anytime. For starters, Antarctic Airways mostly operates flights to King George Island from December to March, so it's not all year round. But there are many more reasons why these flights are unique. If you dig into their website, you'll find you've got two choices: a full day in Antarctica, or an overnight adventure. Prices kick off at $5,500 for a day trip and go up to $6,500 for an overnight stay. And if you're considering a private charter, get ready to shell out a pretty penny. It's rumored to start at around $125,000. Sure, that's a steep price compared to your average cruise ship crossing the Drake Passage, but here's the thing. It's about 20 times faster. A cruise ship takes 2 days from Chile, while Antarctic Airways gets you there in just 2 hours. Air travel to Antarctica is pretty limited, likely due to the high costs, limited seating, and the logistical challenges that come with flying to such a remote location. Plus, flights can often be delayed because of bad weather. Most travelers opt for a quick day trip or an overnight stay on King George Island, usually aboard smaller Beechcraft King Air 300 aircraft. The experience typically includes a stroll to a research station and a boat ride to see nearby penguin colonies, but that's just scratching the surface of what Antarctica has to offer. But once you're aboard Antarctic Airways, you'll see it's just like a regular flight on a smaller plane. You'll be served meals that have received some pretty good reviews. There are even photos floating around online showcasing the food, and honestly, it looks awesome. Those who've experienced it say it's luxurious yet unpretentious. You'll get a mix of meats and cheeses, plus treats like tiramisu, salmon salad, a single after-eight chocolate, and a selection of quality street candies. Today, everything may seem cool and safe, but back in the day, there were some pretty tragic events. On November 28, 1979, Air New Zealand Flight 901 tragically collided with Mount Erebus on Ross Island, Antarctica. Unfortunately, all 237 passengers and 20 crew members aboard lost their lives that day. Since 1977, Air New Zealand had been running regular sightseeing flights over Antarctica. This particular flight took off from Auckland Airport in the morning, with plans to spend several hours exploring the stunning Antarctic landscape before heading back to Auckland via Christchurch that evening. Initially, the inquiry into the incident pointed the finger at pilot error. However, growing public concern led to the establishment of a Royal Commission of Inquiry for a deeper investigation. The commission found that the crash had been primarily due to a change in the flight path coordinates made the night before, which the flight crew hadn't been informed about. As a result, instead of being guided by the computer down McMurdo Sound, as they were led to believe, the aircraft was mistakenly redirected toward Mount Erebus. In a way, this flight looks like modern one-day Antarctic tours. Flight 901 was marketed as a unique sightseeing adventure, complete with a knowledgeable Antarctic guide who highlighted various scenic spots and landmarks through the plane's public address system, while passengers enjoyed a low-altitude tour of McMurdo Sound. These flights operated as day trips, taking off from New Zealand and returning on the same day. The plane departed from Auckland International Airport at 8 a.m., aiming to land in Antarctica, with a scheduled return to Christchurch International Airport by 7 p.m. The total journey covered about 5,360 miles, including a 45-minute stop in Christchurch for refueling and crew changes before completing the final 464 miles back to Auckland, arriving at 9 p.m. Back in November 1979, tickets for these flights were priced at $359 per person, which is over $2,150 in today's money. Anyway, this tragedy isn't the reason why planes don't fly over the South Pole. The real culprits are weather, ETOPS regulations, and of course, penguins. Yep, those cool, friendly little creatures, friendly at least according to researchers. With no natural predators on land, all of them are in the water. They're not really afraid of people and actually seem to enjoy our company. The South Pole is completely uninhabited and packed with penguins, making it pretty tricky to build anything down there. By the way, the North Pole actually allows planes to fly over it. Not too long ago, there were direct flights from Copenhagen to both LA and Tokyo, operated by SAS, and they cruised right over the North Pole. Other airlines joined in too. For example, Emirates ran a flight from Dubai to LA that took the same route. The difference in air traffic between the two poles mainly comes down to where people live and how much land there is. Roughly 88 to 90% of the world's population hangs out in the northern hemisphere, while only about 10 to 12% call the southern hemisphere home. Most folks in the south are clustered around the equator in places like Indonesia, Central Africa, and Brazil. When it comes to flights heading to the South Pole, options are pretty limited. You mainly have routes connecting New Zealand and Australia, parts of southern South America, and a few spots in southern Africa, especially South Africa. There aren't really any direct flights over the South Pole, though some flights can get close to Antarctica. One possible route could connect Auckland, New Zealand to Cape Town, South Africa, but there aren't any scheduled flights for that right now. The few flights that came close to Antarctica are operated by Qantas and LATAM Airlines, linking Australia with Buenos Aires and Santiago de Chile. In 2021, Qantas took a long detour over parts of Antarctica on a flight from Buenos Aires to Darwin, and in July 2023, they adjusted a route closer to the continent to dodge some fierce headwinds on a trip from Santiago to Sydney. Many sci-fi movies can make you believe that everything happening in space is accompanied by some kind of sound effect, which is a totally false misconception. In space, no one will hear you scream. There's no air in space. It's an almost perfect vacuum. And the sound waves don't travel through a vacuum. They can't reach your eardrums and make them vibrate, sending signals to your brain. But it's a good thing, especially for astronauts on spacewalks. If not for the quietness of space, they would be constantly overwhelmed by the noise of solar storms. Huge space explosions sure look super impressive. Whether they're scientifically possible or not is another question. Blasts on our home planet look the way they do because of air and gravity. You see, the air functions as an oxidizer, and the outward pressure makes everything fly into the air and then collapse back to the ground. But this process is very different in space, and it looks even cooler. If a blast occurred in space, there would still be some fire despite the lack of air, because some kinds of fuels can act as oxidizers. But it wouldn't be the fire you're imagining now. This cosmic fire would look like an expanding ball of light. It would be a seemingly never-ending process due to microgravity and the lack of air resistance. Nearby spaceships would be in grave danger since the shrapnel would fly outward until something eventually stops it. All comets have beautiful long tails. Huh? It's nothing but a popular misconception. In reality, comets are very difficult space bodies to spot. They usually spend large amounts of time far away from stars. There, in the darkness of space, they remain rather inactive and completely frozen. Comets only get tails once they come close to a star. That's when they start warming up. This process makes them form some kind of a cloudy atmosphere, which is called a coma, and a distinctive tail. The tail always points away from the star that influences the comet. It happens because the tail gets blown in the opposite direction by solar radiation and solar winds. That's why the tail can often be in front of the comet, not trailing after it. The inner and outer planets of the solar system are separated by the asteroid belt, a ring of asteroids and other debris and space objects orbiting around the sun. While creating movies about space, filmmakers make sure to somehow use this region. Usually, they show the asteroid belt as an extremely crowded place with dense clouds of huge rocks you have to skillfully maneuver to get through to the other side. In reality, if you looked outside your spaceship while flying through this region of space, it would feel as if you're looking at the sky from Earth. All because of the ginormous distances in space. If you decided to cross the asteroid belt, there would be very little chance of a collision with a space object. Asteroids there are really spaced out and very far from one another. Black holes are giant, scary, cosmic vacuum cleaners, they say. But in reality, black holes are more like fly traps. They don't look for things to munch on. Instead, they sit out there quite passively. Only when a star or any other object comes too close does a black hole spring into action. Even so, only those space bodies that cross a certain border get ripped apart. In fact, black holes aren't any different from any other celestial body since their pull is directly proportional to their mass. They can't swallow anything bigger than what their size allows. Even if our sun was somehow replaced with a black hole as massive as itself, nothing would change for Earth or any other planet in the solar system. Gravitationally speaking, of course. Space battles in movies often involve using lasers. But if you were to see such a fight from up close, you would probably be disappointed. The thing is, it would be like nothing in movies. A laser beam is a concentrated burst of energy, and it could indeed be used for many purposes during a fight. But a real-life laser beam would be totally invisible in space since there wouldn't be any particles around to scatter the light and make the beam bright red or green or any other color. A human would be torn into pieces if they got into open space without a spacesuit. Well, contrary to popular belief, taking off a spacesuit during a spacewalk wouldn't be as dramatic as it's often pictured in movies. A person would just lose consciousness due to a lack of oxygen after 15 seconds of being in outer space without protection. But that's if this person breathed out as much air as possible. Otherwise, this oxygen would damage their lungs from the inside, making them rupture. After that, without the protection of the spacesuit, the pressure inside their body would drop. This would cause even more serious trouble. And even though this person definitely wouldn't burst, they wouldn't want to stay outside for too long. People often believe that in space you experience zero gravity, hence the weightlessness astronauts feel on the International Space Station. But that's not exactly true. Gravity is one of the most important forces that exist in the universe. Thanks to it, the Moon orbits Earth and the Sun doesn't float away out of our home Milky Way galaxy. Astronauts on the ISS do experience the effects of gravity, but that's not full-fledged. It's microgravity. The gravity on the space station is only 10% weaker than the gravity on Earth's surface, but astronauts are constantly in freefall. The spacecraft, people inside, and all the objects aboard keep falling forward, not down, but around our planet, following a specific orbit. And since they're all falling together, the crew and the stuff inside seem to be floating. That's why astronauts can move things as heavy as hundreds of pounds with their fingertips. And even though microgravity is often called zero gravity, they are very different things. A light year must mean time, right? Not really. Light years actually measure distance. NASA's definition of a light year goes like this: the total distance that a beam of light moving in a straight line travels in a year. And since light moves at a speed of 186,000 miles per second, a light year equals almost 6 trillion miles. It may seem as if the sun is always on fire. At least that's what it looks like in pictures and in movies. But in reality, our star is a giant ball of gas. Nuclear reactions happening in its core at all times make the sun burn. Every second, hundreds of millions of tons of hydrogen are converted into almost as much helium. During this process, huge amounts of energy are released as gamma rays. Then these rays turn into light. In other words, the sun does emit blinding light and incredible heat, but it's not actually on fire, because no oxygen is involved in the process. The speed of light is believed to be the ultimate barrier for people when it comes to space travel, and it's often thought to be impassable. There are many theories about what it might be like to reach that speed, but none of the equations account for going above it. And still, we know that at least one thing in the universe is faster than the speed of light: the rate of its expansion. Yep, the universe is expanding faster than the speed of light, baffling astronomers and casual sky watchers alike. Or at least we can say so in terms of the speed of different objects, like faraway galaxies relative to each other. At the moment, it's not something scientists understand well. The rate of the expansion of the universe is proportional to how far something is, too. The farther it is from us, the faster it's moving away. But even though we don't get the mechanics of it yet, we've got our proof, even though it's theoretical so far, that some particles might be able to travel faster than the speed of light. Some scientists think there could be more things out there in space that could challenge this speed barrier. All we need to do is find them.
So, if you have some matches and they've gotten wet, don't waste time drying them. The chemical compound can be changed by water and the matches will simply not work. To cure hypothermia, don't get into a hot tub. Fill some bottles with warm water and put them under your armpits. That will help you warm up better than the hot tub for sure. When you're thirsty and don't have much water, don't save it to last you longer. This can lead to further dehydration. Instead, drink every drop of it and try to find more water ASAP. So hydration is a must no matter the weather. But the idea that drinking hot liquids will warm you better is a myth. No amount of hot liquid can raise your body temperature. Plus, you can drink cold water faster than a hot drink, and that will help with hydration. Never poke a beehive because its inhabitants will get defensive. You think? And trying to escape by jumping into a lake or a river won't do any good. Bees will wait for you to resurface and attack you. After you poke the hive, run as fast as you can and don't look back. Sucking the venom out of a snake bite wound is likely to introduce more bacteria into the wound and even poison the person trying to help. Instead, take a photo of the snake, lie down while waiting for help, and try to stay calm. One of the most logical things to do when you're cold is to layer up. Now this is mostly true, but not if you put on cotton clothes. When cotton gets wet, it loses all its beneficial properties and can make you feel much colder. You should always wear wool clothes because they're much better insulators. Never drink cactus water. It can give you a nasty stomachache and even paralyze you, unless it's a fishhook cactus, but even then, it's too risky. Instead, try eating the fruits from the plant. They're full of juice. When you're chased by some predator, never jump off a cliff into the water. This is much more dangerous than meeting the predator. If you jump from a high place, the water surface will feel as hard as concrete, or the water might be too shallow and you'll hit the bottom. GPS is not the best navigational tool. It's reliable and easy to use, but it can break down. So you should learn how to use a map and a compass. They won't let you down if you know how to use them correctly. A puddle of water might look bad and smell a bit, but water is water, right? Well, unfortunately, boiling it can eliminate the bacteria, but not the heavy metals it contains. Those can cause serious health problems. A better option is to find some stream water to boil. Consuming random berries in the forest is dangerous. First, you need to check if they smell okay. If they have a pear or almond smell, avoid them. Next, get one, rub it on your forearm, and wait for 15 minutes. If your skin starts to itch, don't eat those berries. If you bite on a berry and it has a bitter, tingly, or soapy taste, spit it out. Never suck on stones to get some water. It is believed that when you're doing it, your body produces more saliva and it hydrates you. This is not true. If you don't drink water, nothing will help. Even worse, you can choke on the stone. Eating raw meat and fish is really dangerous. Yeah, we eat sushi, but it's normally saltwater fish, which is mostly safe. In the wilderness, always cook meat and fish before eating it. Moss doesn't only grow on south-facing surfaces, it can grow anywhere, depending on the temperature, so never use it to navigate. You'll be better off using some more reliable sources. For example, keep in mind that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Following birds to find water is a myth. They could be flying anywhere. Land animals like deer are a much better option. They usually know where the source of water is. Many survivalists claim that you should eat whatever animals around you are eating. Bad news, this is entirely false. Birds and squirrels consume berries that are super dangerous for us, but they don't harm them. And some animals eat poisonous plants to become venomous. Now, if a leech attaches to you, never burn it off. This can cause the animal to basically throw up directly inside your skin and cause massive infection. Try using a credit card to break the seal and remove the leech. Or if you're brave enough to wait for an hour, the parasite will fall off once it's fed. No matter how strong you are, punching a shark in the nose will not save you. It's a common belief that they have tons of nerves in the nose, and somehow that makes them vulnerable, but it has been proven wrong. If you find yourself in shark-infested waters, punching the animal in the gills or the eyes is much more effective than hitting the nose. After spending some time in the forest, you realize you're lost, and the first thing you start looking for is food. But you can actually live 6 weeks without food. The first thing you must do is find water and shelter from the elements. Do this and worry about the food later. Don't play possum when you encounter a bear. If it's a black bear, you won't be playing for long. Soon it'll be a reality. You should play possum only if it's a brown bear. Now remember the saying, if it's black, fight back. If it's brown, lay down. If it's white, good night. You shouldn't swim parallel to the shore if you find yourself in a rip current. Instead, try swimming at an angle away from the current and toward the shore. Remember, you shouldn't feel too much resistance while swimming. When you're lost, don't spend all your energy trying to make a fire. Try building a shelter first. This can protect you from the elements, and you'll have a place to rest and sleep after a long, exhausting day of surviving. Bonus tip: always build a bed in your shelter. You'll be warmer when you're off the ground. Now, being stuck in a desert will for sure make you hot. But to avoid getting even hotter, don't take any clothes off. The fabric serves as insulation and keeps you cool, unless it's a thick wool sweater, of course. Most people living in hot climates wear white clothes covering their whole bodies to avoid getting overheated. Eating snow can cause further dehydration. Your body will use more energy to melt the snow and thus more liquid. Take your time and melt the snow first, and then you can drink the water. Also, make sure you're only melting pure white snow. Discoloration means it contains something else besides water, especially if the snow is, yellow. If you stay in the cold for too long, you might get nasty frostbite. If you recognize the symptoms, never rub your hands together. It can damage your skin even more. The best thing to do is to seek immediate medical care. So, you see a cave, and the first thing you do is start a fire. Cave people did that all the time, so it must be okay, right? Wrong. The buildup of smoke can be very harmful. Instead, try covering yourself with some plant leaves to warm up. Getting stung by a jellyfish hurts a lot, and taking a leak on a jellyfish sting will not help you. It'll make the situation much worse. Wash the area with salt water and ask for medical assistance. It'll save you from an uncomfortable situation. Trust me on this.
You've probably seen at least one epic quicksand movie scene in your life. Watching a person gradually sink in the sand might cause tangible anxiety and even give you asthma sensations. Movies taught us to believe that falling into quicksand without any help around is fatal, and struggles only help to bring the sad ending closer. This myth may cause problems in real-life situations, so let's debunk it. When researchers studied quicksand, they revealed that it tends to thicken with time, but it still remains very sensitive to movements, even small ones. At higher stresses, quicksand can liquefy in a blink of an eye, but thankfully, a person who tries to swim out of the quicksand will never manage to drown completely. Humans just aren't dense enough. Quicksand is basically water mixed with fine sand and clay, and the density of the human body is twice lower. So, unless you're a superhero made of an unknown massive metal, there's no reason for panic. Remember that you would probably descend about up to your waist without going any further. Although you might feel the tension in your chest, the quicksand will allow you to float away. It might be harder to get out once the sand sediment begins to form, In this case, the quicksand's viscosity will increase and require solid amounts of force. So, let's say you've just stepped into quicksand. How to get out? First of all, if you're wearing a backpack or something heavy, drop what you're carrying immediately. If possible, get rid of your shoes too. It usually takes a minute for the mud to liquefy, so you can try to take a couple of quick steps back. But if you feel that you're stuck, avoid taking large steps. Movie characters usually begin to yell and their friends tug on them with all their might, but in fact, it's not so safe for your body. Just wriggle your legs around to create a space between the body and the quicksand. This way, water can flow down to loosen the sand. It's important to do it slowly and gently. And if you happen to sink up to your hips or higher, bend backward. This way, it will be harder to sink. Keep on floating on your back and gently pull your legs out of the trap. Once your legs are free, you can use your arms to smoothly propel yourself backwards as if you were swimming. When you find yourself at the edge of the quicksand, carefully roll to hard ground. Also, it will be good to carry a stick when you walk in risky areas. It's helpful when you need to detect upcoming quicksand, and if you're already stuck, you can put it horizontally behind your back. It will create a bridge on which you can lean while crawling out. By the way, an object with a higher density would still float on a quicksand. Aluminum, for example, is almost 1.5 times more dense than quicksand. When researchers placed an aluminum ball on top of a container with specially created quicksand, the ball remained on the surface. When they began shaking the container gently, the ball stayed floating on top. But when they shook it a bit harder, the ball sank to the bottom. So, if, say, you dropped a pack of cash on quicksand and you want it back, pull it very carefully using long tongs. And avoid touching the mud itself. Phew! Finally got out of the sandy trap, but here crawls a creepy snake and another movie myth. Green anacondas are one of the largest snakes in the world, and females are usually much larger than males. But the very anaconda from a series of movies measures 40 feet. That's too long even for this extraordinary creature. In real life, the biggest anaconda ever found was 33 feet long and weighed about 880 pounds. Meanwhile, the average length for an adult female anaconda varies between 15 and 16 feet. Anacondas prefer living in swamps and slow-moving streams, mostly in the tropical rainforests of the Amazon and the Orinoco basins. The green anaconda belongs to snakes called constrictors. These snakes are not venomous. Instead, they wrap their bodies around their prey and give it a final hug. Let's say you refused to hug anaconda and continued walking, and suddenly you get bitten by a venomous snake. Everyone knows you should just brace yourself, suck the venom out of the bite, and continue the journey as if it never happened, right? Wrong. This old-school method might seem very epic, but today it's known to cause more harm than good. A venomous snake bite is basically a poorly made injection. The venom doesn't just stay in a bubble under the skin, it gets into the lymphatic system, and it can hardly be removed by suction. But if you manage to do so, you still risk poisoning yourself. Although, technically, swallowing venom is relatively safe, it's still a bad idea. If you have any open sores or cuts in any place from the mouth to the stomach, the venom can still enter the bloodstream and cause damage. Walking is also a bad idea. It's recommended to stay as still as possible to slow down the venom traveling through your lymphatic system. Don't wash the bite. Doctors may use this area to quickly identify the type of snake that bit you, and don't try to change clothing. Any unnecessary movement may cause the venom to move into the bloodstream more rapidly. You arrived at the hospital just in time and the doctors helped you. But unfortunately, your arch enemy is waiting around the corner. He sprinkles a couple of chloroform drops on his handkerchief, puts it on your nose, and nothing happens because we're not in a movie. Chloroform is presented as a common tool to instantly knock someone out in almost every movie where it appears. But in reality, this substance doesn't work so quickly. Even at higher doses, it takes at least 5 minutes for chloroform to start working. And several drops, as it usually appears on the screen, are not considered a high dose. Real doctors widely used chloroform as an anesthetic in the previous century, but it had many unwanted side effects. So later, its usage declined after the development of safer and faster inhalation anesthetics. You run away from the enemy and find yourself trapped in a storage room. There are no windows, but you find a ventilation hatch door. You're not claustrophobic. You can easily escape through a ventilation shaft, right? Nope. Time to debunk another movie myth. Ventilation shafts can be really narrow and dangerous. If you manage to get inside, you'll have to deal with some filters, a fan, and other obstacles. Also, metal edges on the inside can be pretty sharp, which doesn't make the journey safer. And besides, most ventilation shafts are not designed to carry the weight of a human, so it might just fall apart under your body. No big deal. The enemy captures you and takes you on a plane. No time to explain. Let's go skydiving. You're about to shout "Hasta la vista, baby" to your enemy. But unlike in some of the movies, in real life, you cannot talk while you're in freefall. It's impossible to be able to talk whilst 120-mile-per-hour winds are all up in your face. That's why skydivers communicate through hand signals and facial expressions. You land and find yourself in medieval London. But wait a minute, why are all these people so tidy? Thanks to movies, many people imagine those that lived in the Middle Ages as being very dirty and smelling even worse. The myth claims that only rich people bathe and did it only a couple of times a year. But in fact, it's not the case. Unpleasant body odor was associated with sin. So people were expected to do their best to stay fresh, no matter how rich they were. Rich people could afford to immerse themselves in tubs of heated water, while the lower class washed with wet clothes. Also, public saunas and baths were quite common in the Middle Ages, and they were really popular among the common folk too. People went there for the sake of hygiene and socializing, just like in the era of ancient Roman baths. The city of Bath in England was one of the popular destinations. Crowds came from all parts of the country to tidy up and enjoy its famous natural hot springs. Once upon a time, in the deep blue sea, there was a giant monster called the Kraken. People believed it lived in the waters near Norway and Greenland. The first time anyone wrote about the Kraken was a long, long time ago. It was a man named Erik Pontoppidan from Denmark in a book called The Natural History of Norway. He wrote that the Kraken looked like a huge octopus or cuttlefish, and it could pull ships down to the bottom of the ocean. Later on, people started to imagine the Kraken as a giant squid. Even today, the story of the Kraken is still very popular, and it can be found in books, movies, or games. The stories surrounding the Kraken might sound like nothing more than local folklore or myths, but in 2004, the first giant squid was photographed. This amazing discovery was made by a team of Japanese scientists who had been working for years to capture a live giant squid on camera. They used a baited line with a camera attached to it to lure the giant squid to the surface. They also used a special lure that mimicked the light patterns of a small creature to attract the giant squid. After several days of waiting, the team finally got lucky. The image showed the giant creature's long tentacles and large eyes, as well as its distinctive body shape. It didn't stop there, though. In 2012, another team of scientists, this time from National Geographic, filmed a live giant squid for the first time in its natural habitat. This footage gave the world a much better understanding of the giant squid and its behavior. You've surely heard about this next myth too. It was said to be the most beautiful and wealthy city to ever exist. Its entrance was decorated with marble statues. The architecture of this city was sturdy and imposing. The depictions of Greek deities, beautifully painted, could be seen almost everywhere. The city has been the subject of debate for historians and fiction writers alike. We still have very little information on the location of the ancient city of Atlantis. That is, if it even existed. Since it was supposedly swallowed by the sea in its entirety, it's no wonder some curious minds linked it to other mysterious locations on Earth, even to the Bermuda Triangle. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. It's not yet confirmed that Atlantis truly existed. The idea of an island sinking into the sea due to an unknown disaster is a widespread idea in mythology and popular culture. However, it is possible that the story of Atlantis was inspired by actual events, such as the sinking of islands like Helike. On this island, located in the Gulf of Corinth, there was a thriving ancient Greek city. It was known for its prosperity and wealth, and it was also an important spiritual headquarters for the Greeks. The city was home to a building dedicated to the immortal Poseidon, and it was believed that he protected the city himself. However, one fateful night in 373 BCE, a massive earthquake struck the region. The ground shook violently, and the city was swallowed up by the sea in a matter of minutes. The residents of Helike, unable to escape the disaster, all disappeared under the waves. The sinking of Helike was a great tragedy for the ancient Greeks, and it was seen as a punishment from the higher spirits. Many believed that the city's prosperity and pride had angered them, and they had punished the city by destroying it. The city remained underwater for centuries, and it was not until the 20th century that it was rediscovered by modern archaeologists. Today, the most part of the city is still underwater. While we're on the subject of Greek myths, we have to talk about the famous city of Troy. This was a legendary city in ancient Greece. Scientists believed for years that it had been made up by writers and philosophers. According to an ancient Greek legend, the city was founded by the Trojan prince Paris, who stole Helen, the wife of King Menelaus of Sparta, and brought her back to Troy. This event sparked a huge conflict between the Greeks and the Trojans that lasted for 10 years. One of the most famous stories from the Trojan conflict is the tale of the Trojan horse, a large wooden horse that the Greeks built and left outside the city gates as a gift to the Trojans. The Trojans, believing the horse to be a symbol of peace, brought it into the city. But inside the horse, there were Greek fighters who, once inside the city, opened the gates and let the rest of the Greeks in. The Trojans had no escape this time, and they were ultimately defeated. The city was rediscovered in the 19th century in modern-day Turkey. It's located near the Scamander River. Today, this region is an archaeological site and draws a lot of tourists each year. The following myth is indeed sad, but it might have some truth to it too. It is said that years ago, the Solomon Islands in the Pacific Ocean, there lived a man that was deeply in love with his wife. The woman, however, decided to leave him for another man and moved to the nearby island of Tionamanu. Heartbroken and filled with rage, the man sought out a curse to take his revenge. He set out on a journey in a canoe, determined to bring destruction to the island where his wife had fled. Upon arriving at Tionamanu, the man planted 2 taro plants. One he kept for himself. According to the instructions, once his own plant began to sprout, disaster was supposed to strike the island. And it did. The man watched from a mountaintop as a series of waves smashed into the island, causing it to sink beneath the waves. Tionamanu was a real place, but it's not entirely clear when it disappeared. It is said that waves alone could not have washed away this small but tall volcanic island. But an undersea earthquake could have probably done it. The island was balanced on the edge of an unstable underwater slope. The most reasonable explanation is that a huge earthquake shook the region, which made the weak foundation collapse and caused the island to sink beneath the waves. This island-sized landslide would have pushed a lot of water out of the way, which would have created a series of massive mega tsunamis. So, although those vengeful waves could have occurred, they were most likely the result of another event. And that sad man, with his curse fulfilled, returned to the Solomon Islands with his heart still heavy after the loss of his wife. We won't leave the ocean waves just yet, but we're heading over to Hawaii. A legend has it that once upon a time, there was a Hawaiian higher spirit named Pele. She was the protector of volcanic fire and was said to have arrived at the islands to flee from her older sister. To conceal herself, Pele hid in various hideaways on each of the islands until she finally concealed herself in a pit at Kilauea. This is why, according to the legend, Kilauea is known as Hawaii's active volcanic center today. The story may be visually stunning, but in reality, volcanism is caused by the superheated mantle that triggers a lot of melting beneath the surface of our planet. People also say that Pele's tears and hair can be found scattered around the volcano. However, reality has more to do with physics than with folklore. When lava cools rapidly, particularly when it gets quenched in water or a small amount of it flies through the air, it turns into volcanic glass. When it stretches and cools down, it can sometimes form tear-shaped droplets, or it can get stretched so thin that it begins to look like strands of hair. We know today that Hawaii is a volcanic region known for its fire mountains, with huge streams of lava shooting up from active vents. It's no wonder it became an ideal origin place for the story of two sisters and their sibling rivalry.
It all happened in 1708. On June 8th, the Spanish galleon San Jose was going back home to Spain from the Caribbean. In total, there were 17 ships. The captain of the San Jose knew they were in for some trouble, as English ships were lurking in that area. He knew they would be after the treasure loaded on the ships. The price of the treasure from the New World was so astronomical that it could turn the course of historic events in Europe upside down. In order to be safe, the Spanish galleon was to reach Cartagena de Indias. It's where we have Colombia now. But sadly, other things were predestined for the San Jose. The 4 English ships appeared. The galleon couldn't just escape them. There was no choice but to turn around and fight. Then all the chaos started. Red flags showing that the battle started. Firing cannons, the smell of gunpowder. Nobody knows exactly how it all ended. As dusk fell, it was hard to see clearly what was happening. The only thing that remained in history was the sinking flagship San Jose. Then, silence. No wonder that San Jose, being the flagship, was the most strategically important galleon. She would carry an insane amount of precious metals, such as gold and silver, pearls, and gems, such as emeralds. All of that went to stay on the bottom of the ocean for the next 3 centuries. But how come this lost treasure got so legendary? First off, the financial estimates made by scientists shocked people. The ship reportedly carried 7 million to 12 million pesos. Let's translate that to today's money. Yeah, it may not be the wealth that Elon Musk has, but it's around $10 billion. With that money, you could treat yourself to a couple of private jets, a whole car park of Lamborghinis, and a posh mansion. And you'd still have a lot of money left. You may think it all must have gotten rusty, just like the bits and pieces found in the Titanic. But when it comes to gold, things work differently. The Titanic didn't carry gold, or at least not that much of it. The jewels that were on the Titanic were personal belongings. And the cool thing about gold is that it never reacts with oxygen. It means that real gold won't rust or tarnish. So if your golden necklace got somewhat darker, it's a telltale sign it's not pure gold. It's an alloy, which is also cool, by the way, as you can easily clean it. Going back to San Jose's lost treasure, the golden coins there, even over 300 years later, were supposed to look the same way as the day they were minted. Now, going back to the place where the ship supposedly sank, remember I told you the captain wanted to go to the shore where Colombia is today? Well, on December 4th, 2015, the ship was indeed found in the waters of Colombia. As with many other important things today, the world learned about it from a tweet. It was sent by the Colombian then-president Juan Manuel Santos. People have been looking for the San Jose for decades, and once it was finally found, it only got more popular, and even more myths about it began to appear. One of the legends was told by Señor Santos himself. After the wreck had been found, there was a short radio interview. Thing is, the discovery was pretty unexpected. Many people spent a lot of time and effort looking for that wreck, and many of them even gave up hope of ever finding it. Juan Manuel Santos told a story about how the wreck had been discovered. There was an official event outside Colombia where he was accosted by a man. He looked like the famous writer Hemingway. He sported a white beard and had white hair. The only thing that Hemingway-looking man wanted was 2 minutes of Santos's time. The president conceded and listened to the man. What happened next was unbelievable. The man pulled out an antique map, more precisely, a carefully framed copy, and told the president that no one else knew about it. The man pointed to one exact spot. He said that it was the exact location of the treasure, and that that place didn't appear on any other map. He guaranteed that he knew where the treasure was. The story sounded crazy and swashbuckling. Whoever that man was, he turned out to be right. His identity remains a mystery for everyone, but somehow that man found the funding, determined the area to be inspected, and even made his way to meet the president. Right, the San Jose was stuffed with gold, and whoever found it would get filthy rich for the rest of their life. But let's face it, there's no way an ordinary person could ever discover such a treasure, as it requires too much effort and too much funding. But what if you're into treasure hunting and you want to go and find some treasure chests somewhere? Well, I guess I have a story about ordinary people looking and even eventually finding real treasure. Meet Forrest Fenn, an eccentric millionaire who hid a $1 to $5 million treasure. The exact worth was unidentified. You see, even Mr. Fenn himself said he never tried to appraise it. Inside the chest, there were 265 American gold eagles and double eagles, ancient coins, gold nuggets, you name it. Forrest stashed the chest in the Rocky Mountains and announced the treasure hunt back in 2010. Now let's focus on a map for a little bit and see how vast the Rocky Mountains are. Basically, the treasure hunters were supposed to sweep the two countries, both the USA and Canada. At first, it was a small treasure hunt with only a couple of people who knew about it. But sometime later, there was pretty much a competition, as tens of thousands of people set off to look for the treasure. There was research stating that over the decade, about 350,000 people tried their luck looking for the mystery chest. To announce the hunt, Forrest Fenn used a poem made up of 24 lines. The poem had some hints in it that most treasure hunters failed to decode. It was so well hidden that it took 10 years to finally discover it. There was also a blog called Thrill of the Chase, and on June 6, 2020, Mr. Fenn finally posted the long-awaited news. The treasure had been found. Forrest himself admitted that anyone who read the instructions from the poem carefully could find the treasure. The poem created a lot of buzz on the internet, with many users trying to decode the 9 hints the poem had. Some of them even suggested the possible keys to decode the puzzle. Those speculations might have helped the person who eventually found the treasure. At first, even Forrest Fenn himself didn't know who cracked all the codes in the poem, made it through the dense forest, and retrieved the chest. The lucky finder preferred to stay anonymous, and all we initially knew was that it was a man from the eastern United States. The winner sent a photograph to Forrest Fenn, and thus the treasure hunt was officially over. Sometime later, though, he revealed himself. It was Jack Stewart, a former journalist and medical student. The treasure was hidden under a canopy of stars in a forest in the Rocky Mountains. The vegetation there is lush, so the chest was hidden deep within. The chest had never been moved from the place where it was originally hidden. The exact location is still unknown, but we know that the treasure was hidden in Wyoming. Jack admitted that not all the advertised treasures were found in the chest. A small gold frog on a necklace and a Spanish emerald ring were missing. Forrest indeed found the frog in his collection and gave it to Stewart, but he failed to find the ring. The treasure hunt created by Forrest Fenn may seem extravagant, but he explained why he decided to start it. The only thing he claimed to have in mind was to give people some hope. They look like they come from your worst nightmares. There's no evidence they exist, but all the scary stories about them still sometimes sound so real, passed down from generation to generation. Which one is your favorite? The first creature that probably comes to your mind is Bigfoot, a giant creature that reminds you of an ape and allegedly leaves extremely large footprints and other traces that make people in the area of the Pacific Northwest wonder if it's really there. It's so popular, other similar beasts got their own legends too. Like the Mogollon monster, something people also call the Arizona Bigfoot. Reported along the Mogollon Rim, this mysterious creature is 7 feet tall and has big red eyes. Stories say its body is covered with long reddish-brown or black hair, besides its face, chest, feet, and hands. It mimics coyotes, birds, and other wildlife, emitting strange whistle sounds at the same time. The creature tends to explore campsites when it gets dark. It builds nests out of twigs, pine needles, and leaves. And if you're in that area and someone is throwing stones from locations you can't see, yep, Mogollon monster. This creature is omnivorous, which means it eats both plants and animals. And it prefers to wander at night, lurking for innocent prey lost in the woods. Urayuli, a 10-foot mythical creature people say hides in the southwestern woodland parts of Alaska. It's a hulking giant beast known for its extremely long limbs. Legends say their lanky arms are so long they reach their ankles. The creature is covered in a thick coat of hair. The only thing you can see on its face, not covered in the hair, is the creature's eerily luminescent eyes. The legend says Urayuli use their glowing eyes to hypnotize their prey. But not us, since stories say they prefer to catch deer. And they're known to be kind towards humans. And some claim the Urayuli are actually just a type of Bigfoot. Wendigo. This terrifying creature is said to be hiding across the northern forests of Canada and the United States, always looking if there's some lost wanderer. The story says the Wendigo used to be a lost hunter. The freezing winters transformed him into a fierce 15-foot-tall beast with desiccated skin tightly pulled over its large, pointy bones. Stories about this creature showed up in the 20th century, and people say the beast still roams around the forest in long, cold winters, constantly looking for lost people he could grab from the darkness. Lake Worth monster. This scary creature that's part man, part goat is also called the island monster. This 7-foot-tall monster is so strong it could hurl car tires like they were just plastic toys. In a worst nightmare scenario, it could appear in the darkness, sailing from the treetops and fiercely landing with full force on the hood of passing cars. That's how the first people who reported its existence described it. Lake Worth is located west of Dallas and east of Fort Worth. There's a landmass in the middle of this mystical lake known as Greer Island. The legend says that's where this scary monster, also known as Fort Worth's answer to Bigfoot, roams. And that's where some skeptics and thrill seekers still go, wandering around and trying to discover if the legend is true. Lurking in the darkness with its scary red eyes, meet the Mothman, a humanoid beast reportedly seen in the 1960s in Point Pleasant in West Virginia. On one cold night in November of 1966, two young couples reported to the police that they saw a big gray creature with glowing red eyes. It looked like a flying man with wings around 10 feet wide. During the next couple of days, more and more people said they saw the same thing. Later, a wildlife biologist from West Virginia University told reporters that these descriptions fit the sandhill crane. It's a big American crane almost as tall as a human being. It has a 7-foot wingspan and circles of red around its eyes. The gigantic bird may have got out of its migration route and started these stories. Or did it really? Fresno night crawlers. They're not that tall, considering they're monsters, about 5 feet. The upper part of their body is pretty small, so most of their height is their legs. These creatures have allegedly made 2 appearances so far. Once, people saw them in Fresno, California. In contrast, the other time was in Yosemite National Park in California. Both times they were in videos of poor quality, so it wasn't easy to find details of their upper body. But the creature is considered thin and white with no arms. At least, we can't see them. It also has pretty short and stilt-like feet. Have you heard of the slide rock bolter? It's said to be hiding somewhere in the mountains of Colorado. To be precise, in Lizard Head Mountain, only a stone's throw southwest from Telluride. It's some sort of leviathan that lives on the land. This mountain whale carefully observes its surroundings with beady eyes while chilling atop Lizard Head. It hangs from the peak while its split, clawed tail faces its body downward. If anything steps into its territory, the beast lifts its malign fluke immediately and bolts down the mountainside, with its jaw full of razor-sharp teeth wide open. It gobbles whatever or whoever is in front of it, including miners, lost tourists, and loggers. It sweeps through trees and destroys all natural life that's been in its path for more than 100 years. Or at least that's what the legend says. Wow, that's the scariest one for me so far. Altamaha. Somewhere in southeastern Georgia, close to the mouth of the Altamaha River, there's a hissing sea monster hiding. It's one of the biggest rivers in Georgia that empties into the Atlantic Ocean, and the entire area that surrounds the river is full of small islands, canals, dikes, ponds, acres of marshes, and old rice fields. Perfect for such a monster to hide, don't you think? The story says this unusual cryptid has a sturgeon-like body, including a bony ridge on its top. Due to its front flippers, the creature swims like a dolphin. His snout reminds me of a crocodile. His teeth are large and sharp, whereas his eyes are big and protruding. The beast is green or gray with a white-yellowish underbelly and is up to 30 feet long. There's no physical evidence the Altamaha really lives there, but the legends date back centuries when people started talking about an enormous snake-like beast that hissed and bellowed. Loch Ness Monster, or how many like to call it, Nessie. This myth dates back from old times, all the way to a group of people that lived in ancient Scotland known as the Picts. The legend started to grow in the 1930s. Back then, a road near Loch Ness was finished, offering a nice view of the lake without bigger obstacles. And in April of 1933, a couple noticed there was a large animal. They compared it to a prehistoric monster or dragon. Most people imagine it as a plesiosaur, which is basically a marine dinosaur. The beast quickly crossed the couple's car's path and then disappeared below the water's surface. Later that year, some researchers even big footprints. They believed they were from a pretty soft-footed solid creature around 20 feet long. Later, some determined the tracks were the same as the ones that a hippopotamus leaves. Plus, scientists said the lake wasn't that nutrient-rich for such a large predator. There are not enough animals to support such a beast at the top of the food chain. But the legend about a giant mythological creature has moved on, and still makes people across the world wonder if there's really something hiding deep down in the dark, murky waters of Loch Ness.
Now, one of the most common animal myths is that mice love cheese. It popped out a long time ago, probably as early as when people started storing food. Since mice are regular visitors to human homes, they were constantly looking for food they could eat. People used to store grains in glass jars. They also kept their meat hanging up high. But they'd lay the cheese on the shelf, which was an easy target for all the unwelcome pantry visitors like mice. So they ate it because they couldn't reach anything better. But a mouse will definitely more likely go after chocolate or some other sweet thing than the cheese. Who can blame them? Now, flamingos don't really stand in the water on one leg so they wouldn't get cold. This is just a simple way for them to spare the effort. It's exhausting for us humans to stand on one leg, but for them, this is the most stable position possible considering their peculiar anatomy. This pose doesn't require any muscular work. Now I'm jealous. One of the most widespread and oldest myths out there is that ostriches hide their heads in the ground every time they're scared. A long time ago, researchers thought ostriches weren't very smart because they bury their heads in the ground without being aware the rest of their large bodies are still out there, where everyone can see them. In fact, ostriches do it when they want to swallow sand and pebbles to boost their digestion or just turn over the eggs they lay in their nests. And even then, they technically don't bury their head, but put it near the ground. Otherwise, with its head in the sand, the poor thing wouldn't be able to breathe. No reason to think of an ostrich as a frightened bird. Like some other animals, it will flee if it senses there's a danger coming. And in some situations, it'll fight back and defend itself. And that's one angry bird. What do you think is the largest thing a blue whale can swallow? Well, we're talking about the biggest animal ever known to have lived on our planet. It can grow up to 100 feet long with a weight of 200 tons. Its heart is as big as a car, and its tongue can weigh as much as an average elephant. It's easy to imagine a blue whale swallowing cars, people, and even small ships, perhaps. But it's all wrong. The largest thing it can actually swallow is a grapefruit. Its throat can take the size of a small salad plate. Whales feed on small fish, plankton, and marine crustaceans, so they don't need a bigger throat. But we wouldn't be able to survive the juices inside a blue whale's stomach anyway. It would finish us within 15 seconds, similar to how long we'd last in space without a spacesuit. So don't try this. Camels don't store water in their humps. We're talking about animals with extraordinary resistance to some pretty extreme conditions. They can survive even when drinking water only every 8 to 10 days. But not because they have a secret stash on their back. It's because, when they have a chance to drink, they will swallow 50 gallons of water at one sitting. They mostly use it to replenish 30% of their total body weight, an amount they can lose by dehydration. So, they lose a lot of water but quickly regain it. Their humps are where they deposit fat, but it's not for producing water. The oxygen camels would need to inhale would cause them to lose too much water because it would evaporate through their lungs. That's why they use fat as a nutritional source for energy. This helps them survive in arid regions and times of scarcity. Now, it's a myth that anteaters vacuum ants using their noses. They don't go around looking for ants and hoovering them through their long snouts. Anteaters have very long tongues. Giant anteaters have tongues that go up to 2 feet long. It's the shape of a strand of spaghetti and covered in spiny hooks and sticky saliva that traps ants, up to 160 times in a minute, which means they eat up to 20,000 insects in a single day. That's a lot of bugs. They open anthills using their claws and then do the rest of the work with the tongue. They don't have teeth, so they only swallow all the insects they catch. Movies might have given you a false sense of security when it comes to dinos. Nope, standing very, very still couldn't save you from a raging T-Rex coming after you. It's a myth. The Dino King had bad vision. These beasts may have seen better than modern-day raptors. They had excellent depth perception, something present in today's animals such as eagles and hawks. Even if, by some miracle, the Dino King can't see you or thinks you're just a small tree or some other object because you're standing so still, they had a pretty good sense of smell. So, the better option would be to run because the T-Rex is not as fast as scientists used to think, up to 33 miles per hour. Considering their anatomy, they could move at a speed of 12 miles per hour. Anything faster than that would have caused serious bone damage. But this didn't stop them from ruling the animal world because there were plenty of dinosaurs way slower than them, so they didn't have to worry about food. Another misconception states that owls can spin their heads, neither more nor less than 360 degrees. Their head spinning does have its limit, 270 degrees in one direction. Since they can turn 270 degrees to the left and right, owls have a 540-degree range of motion. Don't worry, if you touch a butterfly's wings, the animal won't lose its ability to fly. It will survive, despite the common myth that says the opposite. Butterfly wings have scales. When you touch them, some scales might shed off, but it's not a bad thing, because they shed off naturally too. Because of sheddable scales, they can escape more easily if they get stuck and trapped in spider webs. Now, the next myth has inspired many movies, books, and TV series scenarios, but no, wolves don't howl at the moon. They typically howl at night, true, but because that's the period of time when they're most active. They'll also look up while howling since this helps the sound travel. That way, other wolves will hear them from around 6 to 7 miles away. And that's why they howl in the first place, to communicate with each other. They make specific sounds for a certain situation. For example, to help a wolf that lost its pack find its way home. The moon just happened to accidentally be there while wolves were communicating. Okay, Giraffes only need 30 minutes of sleep a day. That's another myth. They sleep about 4.5 hours daily. It's not that unusual for animal species that are most active during daylight. Studies also show giraffes usually lay down to sleep for less than 11 minutes at a time. Many people believe moles are blind. These small burrowing mammals actually can see. It's just their vision is really poor and only adapted to recognize light. They're also colorblind. When they're searching for food and navigating the dark underground, these creatures mostly rely on their touch and sense of smell. Now, their sense of touch is sharp, which is why moles can feel nearby vibrations of activity. This helps them avoid danger or find their next meal more easily, like millipedes, worms, centipedes, and other invertebrates. Yum! They're really fast at digging and can dig a couple of inches per minute. In the winter, animals hibernate, not because it's too cold for them to be outside, but because there isn't enough food during that period. When an animal is in hibernation, its heart rate, body temperature, breathing, and other metabolic activities slow down significantly. That's how they conserve energy. Chipmunks, bats, turtles, snakes, they all hibernate during the winter, which saves them energy for other seasons when they get more active and are capable of getting more food. I'd say bears too, but they're not the true hibernators. If you try waking one up during the winter when you believe the animal is sleeping, you might end up having a bad time. Now, they do slow down, which means they sleep for extended periods of time. They're still not asleep for the entire winter season, and you can easily wake them during their sleep, so let's not. Now, don't believe myths. Earwigs won't lay eggs in your ears. Yup, despite their name, they're not that interested in your ears. Well, at least there's no evidence they'd want to go there. They prefer to spend their time in dark, moist places, such as under tree bark or in soil. So, your ears are off the hook. Now, cartoons might show it differently, but mice are not actually that into cheese. This myth occurred during the Middle Ages. At that time, many foods rats and mice like way more than cheese were out of their reach. For example, people would store grains in jars or keep meat hanging. But cheese usually matured hidden in cupboards or shelves. Rats and mice could easily get to these spots. So, people would usually find them there, eating not what they liked the best, but what was within their reach. Now, dogs don't see the world in black and white. They do distinguish colors, but not as well as we do. We have 3 types of cones in our eyes, while dogs only have 2 of those. Cones are special photoreceptors that help us perceive colors. Dogs can see certain colors, such as blue and yellow, better than the rest, and they can hardly see red and green. Dogs' mouths are by no means cleaner than humans. They have over 600 kinds of bacteria in their mouths, and their saliva doesn't have any healing properties. They don't sweat through their tongues either. When dogs pant, their tongues hang out, so people think that's how they sweat. But in reality, most sweat glands are on their paw pads and all over their body. They pant to evaporate extra moisture from their nasal passages, tongues, and the lining of their lungs. Panting is also another way to cool down. Opossums have some pretty cool abilities. They have a good memory and immunity to most snakes' venom. They're also very social. But, contrary to popular belief, they don't sleep while hanging by their tails. These animals have strong tails, true, and it makes them excellent climbers, but they don't have the necessary muscle structure to hold such a position for a long time. Now, bats are not blind. They are nocturnal animals and might not see well during the day, but their vision is 3 times better than ours during the night. They do lack color receptors, but people can't see colors in low light either. Bats also use echolocation, which is locating things by the sound waves they reflect to detect small insects in the air. Chameleons have the ability to change the colors on their body, but they don't do it just to blend in with their surroundings. They do it to communicate with others of their kind or to regulate the body temperature, not to camouflage themselves. When these animals are in their natural state, they mostly resemble branches or leaves. Now, it sure looks like it, but rhino horns aren't made of bone. They're made of keratin, the same material you can find in your fingernails and hair. A horn is not attached to the rhino's skull. Instead, it's like a very, very compacted mass of hair. It grows throughout the rhino's lifetime, just like our nails and hair. The horn also looks like something a rhino can use for its defense, but that's not always the case. Some animals use their teeth to protect themselves against their enemies. No wonder the teeth on their lower jaws are so sharp. If you press the snooze button in the morning, you're not actually going to get those extra 10 minutes of sleep. It sure feels good to postpone getting up and staying in the warm bed at that moment, but the snooze button makes you feel more tired instead of providing you with extra rest. You see, your brain believes it's going to fall asleep again, which is why it will get harder and harder for you to get up when the alarm rings for the second or fifth time. In the long run, the snooze button may mess with your ability to get high-quality deep sleep. Now, when you mention desserts, I always think of chocolate. Oh wait, I did a boo-boo. Let's start that again. When you mention deserts, most people picture endless sandy areas, hot and dry. But you should define deserts not by temperatures, but by a lack of precipitation. Most of the well-known deserts across the world are indeed hot, but some are extremely cold. For example, there are polar deserts in northern Greenland. Can we talk about chocolate some more? No? Okay. Well, here's another one. Lightning won't strike the same place twice. Not really. In fact, lightning can and often does strike the same spot repeatedly. So, if you get caught in a thunderstorm, better look around. Instead of hiding in the place already struck by lightning, try to find some shelter and avoid touching anything metal. You won't see an owl turning its head a full 360 degrees, even though it may look like the bird is doing it. Instead of eyeballs, owls have eye tubes. These tubes go far back into their skulls. In other words, owls have their eyes fixed in place. That's why they have to turn their heads when they want to see what's going on around them. They can't make a full circle with their necks, but they come very close, 270 degrees, which is 3/4 of a full rotation. Not bad. Cats don't only purr when they feel content and happy. They can also do it if they're sick, scared, or even angry. Despite all stereotypes, these felines don't gracefully land on their feet every time they fall. True, they do have the so-called righting reflex. A cat has a vestibular apparatus inside its inner ear, which is the natural balancing system the animal uses to orient itself. With the help of this system, a cat can quickly figure out how to rotate its head so that the body can follow. In the end, the animal lands on its feet, but this reflex doesn't work every time. Elephants don't use their trunks as a drinking straw. When an elephant is thirsty, it pulls some water into its trunk, then brings it to its mouth and funnels the water inside. In other words, when these animals drink water, it doesn't go through their trunks, the same as people don't drink through their noses. Well, most people. Elephants have huge ears, but they can also listen with their feet. When they want to examine some faraway noise, elephants freeze and lean forward so that most of their weight is on their front legs. Sometimes they even lift one of their front feet. They rely on seismic communication, which means they detect sound waves that travel not through the air, but through the ground. There are many myths about your brain, like its right part is creative and the left one is logical. But your brain doesn't work this way. It's not strictly divided into parts that exclusively cover only one area, like logic or creativity or something else. Actions you take and things you go through are the results of the activity of your entire brain. The cerebral cortex is the part of your brain that consists of two halves, but both of them are connected to many other areas that make up the rest of the brain. So, no neurons in the left part of your brain will turn you into a computer whiz, and those in the right half won't turn you into a poet. Now, you may think your brain shuts off when you fall asleep, but it doesn't. It has slow activity rates when you're in a deep sleep and becomes more active when you're dreaming. During this stage, your brain's activity is almost the same as it is when you're fully awake. Now, not to freak you out, but you don't see with your eyes, hear with your ears, or feel with your skin. For example, you're washing your face, but your skin itself doesn't have sensors for wetness. Your brain uses a combination of multiple sources of information, including temperature, touch, or your earlier experience. That's why you feel that your face is wet. Your brain creates that sensation after analyzing all kinds of different information. Your brain doesn't actually react to things going on around you. It may seem like that. You see a cute little puppy and it makes you smile. Your friend makes some silly joke and you blush. But neurons in your brain don't just wait until something happens to react to that. Instead, they're trying to guess what might happen next all the time. Your brain starts analyzing your actions and the experiences you've gone through even before it gets data from your ears, nose, eyes, and other organs. Your brain is always working to predict what the world will be like in the next moment and what you will do in this world. So even though you're not actually reacting to the world, this process of prediction is happening so effortlessly and quickly that you feel like you do. Moving on, Jupiter doesn't technically orbit the Sun. When a smaller and less massive space object circles a bigger one, it doesn't travel in a perfect circle. Instead, both of these objects follow their respective elliptical orbits around a barycenter, which is their common center of gravity. Earth is way smaller than the Sun. That's why the barycenter it shares with our star is really close to the center of the Sun. That's why we can't see that our planet's orbit is a little bit off-kilter. But Jupiter is the biggest planet in our solar system. Its weight is more than twice as great as that of the rest of the planets, asteroids, moons, and comets combined. That's why the barycenter of Jupiter and the Sun is a little further from the star's center, around 30,000 miles above the surface. Okay, can we go back to the chocolate? Well, maybe next time. Well, I hate to break this to you, but the Sun isn't really yellow. Technically, the light it gives off is white. It's all because of the atmosphere, our atmosphere. There's an effect called Rayleigh scattering. That's when the gases in the atmosphere bend the light. The same effect is the reason why the sky seems to be blue, or why sunsets look like a stunning combination of reds and oranges. On a lighter note, if you go into space, you won't immediately be weightless. Scientists mostly agree that space begins where our atmosphere is more or less a vacuum, which is 62 miles up. But it's not like you magically become weightless from the moment you pass that point. Let's say you're in a rocket that's speeding up. You'll definitely feel the gravity of our planet. But you'll feel weightless from the moment you start falling down. To orbit something actually means you're falling forever around that particular object. The Moon is orbiting us. We're orbiting the Sun. Our entire solar system orbits around the center of the Milky Way, our galaxy. That's just a crazy cosmic dance where they're all falling toward one another. So, if you're 250 miles above our planet, you'd have to travel 17,500 miles per hour around the Earth to feel continuous freefall. That's the speed at which the International Space Station and people who work there orbit around our planet. Meanwhile, if you turn the thermostat up high, the rate of heating won't increase. It doesn't put more effort in when you set a higher temperature. For example, if you set the thermostat at 85 degrees Fahrenheit, you won't change the heating speed, only the target temperature. If you set it higher, you might end up wasting more energy, and you'd be too hot. Now, the 7 spikes on the Statue of Liberty are not there to represent the 7 continents and 7 seas, as some previously thought. The spikes stand for sun rays, while the circle is there as some halo. It's like when immigrants arrive on a boat, the statue greets them with, "Hello and welcome." Do you still believe that summer is so warm because, at that phase, our planet gets closer to the sun? Well, it's a big fat myth. When it's summer in, say, the northern hemisphere, our planet isn't actually closer to the sun. It's the opposite. The Earth is at its farthest point from the sun during July and at the closest point during January. Summer is warm because our planet is tilted. During its orbit, the Earth's tilt allows the energy coming from the sun to hit us more directly because the angle is steeper. Now, anteaters don't eat ants through their nose. They rip open anthills with their claws and get the ants through the holes with their super long tongues. Those can extend twice as long as their entire heads. The tongues are sticky and covered in tiny spikes, so it's not that hard for them to trap those ants. Anteaters manage to swallow up to 20,000 ants on a daily basis. Now, T-Rex didn't have bad vision. Some research showed that they may have had depth perception even better than today's eagles and hawks do. Also, they weren't as fast as they are in the movies. Based on the structure of their body, they were probably moving no faster than 12 miles per hour. Any quicker than that would damage their bones. But that wasn't a bad thing, because the T-Rex would go after dinosaurs way slower than itself most of the time. Ooh, that's one beautiful butterfly. Ooh, don't touch it. It won't be able to fly again. No worries, it's another popular myth. It'll live and still fly if you touch it gently. Butterflies have scales on their wings, which means some might shed off if you touch them. But those scales will shed off naturally anyway. Such sheddable scales may be the reason why they manage to escape when a spider catches them in their web. Now, wolves really don't howl at the moon. It might make a good movie scene, but in real life, they howl because they're active during the night. They look up not to stare at the moon, but because that way the sound they make will travel better. The rest of the wolves will hear them from distances of 6 to 7 miles away. They howl to communicate with them and even have a special sound they make when they lose their pack. Wolf packs don't necessarily have an alpha leader. When more wolves get together, they get competitive and want to dominate others. So it might seem one always has to end up as an alpha. But when they're in the wild, they stick with their families to help each other. The elder wolves naturally have higher status, similar to many other animal families. Have you ever heard that giraffes only sleep for half an hour a day? Well, it's false. They sleep approximately 4.5 hours daily. It's fairly normal amongst animals that are active during the day. They tend to lay down and go to sleep for less than 11 minutes at a time. Crocodilia, the order to which crocodiles and alligators belong, can't run as fast as a racehorse. That's a myth. They can reach up to 12 miles per hour when they're on land, but even when they do, they can't move at such speeds for a long time, maybe 60 to 80 feet before they get tired. A really fast human will move at 12 miles per hour while walking, so many people could outrun a crocodile without even breaking into a run. But it's different when they're in the water, when they move at speeds of more than 20 miles an hour. Trying to outswim them is probably not a good idea. Crocodilia are not lizards. They're not even related. They may look similar, but these two are completely separate orders. Archosaurs have two lineages. One includes birds and dinosaurs, and another one includes crocodiles. Lizards have nothing to do with them, the snobs. Alligators and crocodiles are basically the same. Here's another myth. They do come from the same family and look pretty similar, but they had their last common ancestor 65 million years ago. That's a long, long time ago, back when the primates diverged from species such as bats. They look similar because they have an excellent body structure to survive. It means evolution didn't have to add or remove anything to change that. Sharks can't smell a single drop of your blood from miles away. Whew! They do have a highly developed and enlarged brain area that's in charge of smelling odors, true, that allows some of them to detect very small amounts of blood in the water, like a drop in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. But the ocean is so much bigger, and it's not that calm, which means it will take the odor away. Sometimes, though, when the currents are favorable and the day is good, a shark will smell the potential prey from a couple of football fields away, but not miles. Now, that thing about sharks can't survive if they stop swimming, that's only partially true. Sharks breathe only when they're swimming because that's when they push water over the gills. That's true for some of the shark species, but there are many others that can pump water over the gills and get oxygen without swimming. For example, bottom-dwelling nurse sharks. Now, sharks don't have swim bladders. That means they'll sink to the bottom if they stop swimming. But their bodies are adjusted to such conditions, which means rapid descents or ascents won't really harm them. The asteroid belt isn't that dangerous, at least not like in those movies where spaceships are flying through a dense and chaotic field of rocks smashing into each other. The asteroid belt is a zone that's 200 million to 300 million miles away from the Sun. It's a very isolated and lonely void with a lot of space in between. If you pulled all those asteroids from that belt together, you'd get a mass that's maybe 4% of our moon. That's why astronauts get really excited when they see just one asteroid smashing into one another. At least something's happening there. Your brain can grow new cells. Well, that's kind of true and false at the same time. Most parts of your brain aren't capable of growing new neurons, but some areas can do it. For example, a part called the hippocampus. It's a very important region of the brain for remembering things, learning, regulating how much we eat, and some other vital biological functions. Many other animal species can regrow brain cells across the whole brain, but that doesn't work for us. Some scientists think it might be because we live longer than many other species, which requires a memory we can depend on. Now, that's why the human brain had to find a way to collect experiences across a long span of years. So, new neurons in the hippocampus, for example, could be there for making new memories and learning new things rather than just remembering the things from the past. Those new brain cells help your brain cultivate your past and use it to chart your future. Or just get yourself an elephant. They never forget. Ooh, great news! Eating ice cream won't make your cold worse. Frozen dairy can help soothe a sore throat and give you the calories you need when you don't feel like cooking or eating anything more substantial. Giraffes sleep for way more longer than 30 minutes a day. Their night and afternoon naps add up to around 4.5 hours a day. You can't have a truly photographic memory, even if you can recall visual material in more detail than others. You'll never compare to a film or camera sensor when it comes to precision. A bigger brain doesn't automatically make you smarter. Elephants and whales have brains way larger than humans. We might not have an impressive brain-to-body mass ratio, but 86 billion neurons help humans stay the smartest species on the planet. Light isn't the fastest thing in the world, it's gossip. No, actually, nothing can compare to it in speed in a vacuum, but it slows down when it's going through water or glass. Particles like electrons, neutrons, or neutrinos win in those conditions. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter isn't tumbling with dangerous rocks constantly colliding. If you ever found yourself there, you'd see how empty and calm it is. The asteroids are so far apart from each other, the chances of collision are super small. A spaceship radar would detect it and help avoid any risks. You don't have to wait for the spring equinox to make an egg stand on its head. It doesn't need equal gravity or anything and can perfectly do it on any day of the year. Oranges aren't always orange. The green-skinned variety is just as sweet and perfectly ripe. This skin color protects them from the sun and is also a sign that there's plenty of chlorophyll in the fruit. That's why green oranges mostly grow in warmer climates and are sometimes painted orange to look more regular to buyers across the world. More good news. You really always can squeeze in some dessert, no matter how much salad, soup, or meat you've eaten before. You get bored of the savory tastes, but when you see and smell ice cream, cakes, cookies, and chocolate, let me take a minute here. Your brain gets excited and overrides fullness signals for pleasure. Plus, your stomach is a flexible organ, and sugar helps it relax and physically make room for dessert. You have way more than 5 senses. In addition to sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, there is your ability to sense heat and cold, detect vibrations along air or water, tell where some of your body parts are in relation to others, feel pain, thirst, hunger, time, and many other things. When you call someone using your cell phone, the signal doesn't go through a satellite. Your gadget is always looking for wireless radio signal and transmitting data to and from land-based cellular towers. If you want to call someone, the nearest tower connects you to another cell through a huge network of tower-to-tower communications. Brown sugar isn't any healthier than white sugar. It's mostly white sugar with some extra residual sticky syrup in it. This syrup has some vitamins and minerals like potassium and magnesium, but even that doesn't make it diet food. The Eiffel Tower was supposed to be there for just 20 years. The idea of it was to show off France's industrial power during the World's Fair. But because Eiffel added a radio antenna and wireless telegraph transmitter to it, they decided to keep it. It also has a secret apartment on top and used to double as a meteorology lab. It's also a great landmark for a rendezvous. Green and black tea really come from the same bush. The leaves get their different tastes and looks after they've been harvested. Green tea is withered and heated through steaming. Black tea is crushed or curled and then allowed to oxidize and darken. Honey can spoil if you leave it uncovered in a humid environment. Keep the lid on and make sure no water gets inside, and it'll be edible for a really long time. Its antibacterial powers won't let any organism settle in there. If you leave wasps alone, no, they won't necessarily do the same. Bees will respect your boundaries if you don't try to hurt them. Yellow jackets are so bad-tempered, they can sting even if you're just walking by their nest without knowing it and are perfectly still. So there. Camels don't store water in their humps. They use it as a reservoir for fat to let them survive for days in the desert without stopping for food. They get water in huge amounts on the way to keep them hydrated. Excess water stays in their bloodstream. Owls can't turn their heads full circle. 270 degrees is as far as they can go without seriously hurting themselves. It's possible thanks to their unique neck bone structure. Bats aren't blind. When it's dark outside, they hunt using echolocation, using echoes bouncing off objects to navigate. There are many kinds of bats, and some of them can see 3 times better than humans. They have receptors that enable these bat species to see ultraviolet light. Fortune cookies aren't originally from China. According to the most popular version of the origin story, they were invented by a Japanese immigrant in San Francisco in the early 1900s. Einstein wasn't bad at math in school. He mastered calculus at age 15 and was always at the top of his class. This myth comes from the story of Einstein failing an entrance exam to a college in Zurich. He did great at the math portion, but failed botany, zoology, and language sections. Elephants are really afraid of mice. Like most mammals, they have brains programmed to jump back when they see a critter. No matter how huge they are, elephants will be startled by little things moving fast by their feet. A mouse can't do them any harm, though. Even if it tried climbing up the trunk, the elephant can easily get it off. The sun isn't yellow. It's a bunch of colors that mix and make it appear white. We see it as yellow or orange because the atmosphere of the Earth scatters colors like blue, green, and violet. This is also why we see the sky as blue and the sun looks warmer at sunrise and sunset. Not all comets have tails. When they're next to a star, they look like small frozen chunks of ice and rock. As they approach a star, the ice is scattered away thanks to the solar wind and looks like a tail. Sometimes these tails are too faint to see. Comets can also get a tail of dust and gas particles. An ostrich doesn't hide its head in the sand when in danger. They are the fastest two-legged animals and can outrun almost any intruder or kick them with their powerful legs. They sometimes bend down to eat some sand for better digestion. They also do it to check their eggs in the ground when they start a family. You can sleep outside after washing your hair and it won't make you sick. Even sleeping outside in sub-zero temperatures at that time can just make you chilly and make your hair freeze. Viruses cause colds, and they don't care about your hair condition. The Earth doesn't get closer to the Sun in the summer. In reality, it's farthest from the Sun in July and closest to it in January. It's warmer in the summer because the axis of our planet is tilted, letting its northern part catch more sunlight for half of the year and the southern part for the other half. So, in summer, the Sun is above the horizon for up to 17 hours a day and just for around 6 hours during winter. You can't see millions of stars even on the clearest night and far from sources of light. The highest number you can see if you have really good eyesight is around 3,000 of them. They are the ones that are close enough and bright enough. Some other luminous objects you can spot are planets, distant galaxies, and artificial satellites. The Moon really doesn't have a dark side. It's tidally locked with Earth, so we always see just one side of it. The Sun, the Moon, and our Earth are all constantly moving. So there are times when the side of the Moon visible to us is lit, and then its other side. It only seems dark to us. No worries, you don't eat 8 spiders every night in your sleep. Most people sleep with their mouths closed, so a spider can't make it inside. Even if you sleep with your mouth wide open, the powerful vibrations you produce while breathing and a warm stream of air coming out of your mouth will scare away any little spider. A penny dropped from the Empire State Building won't damage anyone on the ground. It's lightweight and can't speed up enough to be that devastating. The coin's speed does grow with every passing second during the fall, but the air resistance increases too. The worst it can do to a passerby is sting a little. Mammoths were really still roaming the planet at the time the pyramids in Giza were built. Most mammoths had been wiped out around 10,000 years ago, but a small population of 500 to 1,000 woolly mammoths lived in the Arctic until as recently as 1650 BCE. The Great Pyramid of Giza had existed for 1,000 years by the time the last woolly mammoth disappeared. Your tongue doesn't have bitter, sweet, sour, salty, or umami sections for tasting. Not even ooh daddy. Each of the 8,000 taste buds that you have on the tongue, the roof of the mouth, and even in the throat can detect all the tastes the same way. You don't have to worry about putting certain foods in certain places in your mouth to get a better taste. Fingerprints aren't 100% unique. Related people can have somewhat similar patterns. Plus, with over 7 billion people on the planet right now, and not all of the fingerprints recorded, we can't be sure anyway. Your brain has more nerve connections than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. It's around 200 billion stars versus 100 billion nerve cells multiplied by 40,000 nerve connections. It's impossible to breathe and swallow at the same time. There's a food pipe and a windpipe at the back of your mouth. When you swallow, the air could take the food through the wrong pipe down to your lungs. The consequences would be dramatic. To prevent it from happening, there's a flap guarding the windpipe. When food or drink is going through, breathing is temporarily paused. You can't hum while holding your nose. You're exhaling during humming, and when both your mouth and your nose are closed, the air can't escape. Sushi restaurants don't serve real wasabi. It would be incredibly expensive, so they replace it with dyed horseradish with mustard. The real thing is from the same family of plants. It's served fresh, grated off the stalk, and tastes sweeter. Your chances of getting it are about 0.5%, and if you do, you'll know it from a super high price. Carrots weren't originally orange. Before the 16th to 17th century, almost all of them were purple, with some rare yellow and white exceptions. Orange carrots have been cultivated by Dutch farmers. They believe they'd be easier to grow. It's true that things appear weightless in outer space, but there's gravity everywhere. The further you get from a heavy object, like Earth, the weaker it gets. Still, gravity affects every single spot in the universe that has mass. Strawberries aren't berries. Neither are raspberries or blackberries. Bananas, eggplants, grapes, tomatoes, and oranges are berries. They have 3 distinct fleshy layers, 2 or more seeds, and develop from one flower. You do have enough iron in your body to produce a metal nail that's 3 inches long. Try it sometime. Wait, don't. Lightning can strike the same spot twice, 3 times, or more than 100 times. Even during the same thunderstorm, nothing can stop a lightning bolt from striking the same place it had struck a few seconds earlier or centuries ago. Lightning prefers tall and isolated objects. The Empire State Building, for example, is hit about 25 times a year. The largest living organism isn't the blue whale or the African elephant. It's honey fungus across the Blue Mountains in Oregon. It's as long as 6.5 Burj Khalifas end to end, and that's the world's tallest building. It's still growing, and it's edible. Turkeys can blush, just like humans. The skin on their heads and necks can turn red or blue when they're excited, angry, or sick. The flap of skin over their necks is called a snood and can go bright red from excitement. During mating season, male turkeys' wattles also turn scarlet to show their interest to females. The Sahara isn't the biggest desert in the world. The Antarctic desert is almost twice as large. The second place belongs to the Arctic desert, and the Sahara is third. The main feature of a desert isn't the excessive heat or dunes. It's the lack of precipitation. The ice fields and rocky mountains of the Antarctic almost never get a drop of rain. Sitting too close to a TV won't make you go blind or give you serious vision problems. Hey, tell that to my mother. It can temporarily strain your eyes, but long-term problems are super rare. Reading in the dark won't make you go blind either. Flies live longer than 24 hours. An average housefly lives for around 1 month. Fruit flies have a lifespan of 40 to 50 days. Over this time, one female fly can have up to 500 offspring. That's why leaving flies in a locked room and waiting won't solve your insect problem. Bears don't sleep for months during hibernation. The processes in their bodies slow down and they don't eat or drink. But they can still perfectly react to any unexpected things going on around them, so keep your distance from their dens. Cracking your knuckles isn't bad for your health. The sound you'll hear while doing it is a special organic fluid bursting into the gaps between your bones. It happens under the pressure you put on your joints and is harmless. Goldfish don't forget everything that happens to them after 3 seconds. Experiments have proven they can do pretty well with their tiny brains storing information for several months. They can also hide from their foes and find food. You can't fry an egg on a sidewalk, no matter how high the temperature is outside. An egg needs 158 degrees to cook though, and a sidewalk only gets to a maximum of 145 degrees. Bananas don't grow on trees. They're an herb related to the ginger family and look somewhat like aloe vera or other stem-like succulents. Chameleons don't change their color to blend in with the environment. They do it to show their mood and to communicate. They turn black when they're nervous or upset, and when they're happy, you'll see the bright green or blue. They use lighter colors to attract mates. Toilet flushes don't spin in the opposite direction in the southern hemisphere. The Earth's rotation affects things like the Gulf Stream and hurricanes, but it has no control over toilets. The direction varies from model to model and depends on the water pressure. Mustard seed isn't the smallest in the world. The record holder in this category is the orchid seed from the tropical rainforest. Some of them are so small, you won't see them with an unaided eye. They pop out in the air like dust particles and land on rainforest trees to spread further. Carrots are full of vitamin A, but even that isn't enough to help you see in complete darkness. It can only help you maintain healthy eyesight. Everything in the solar system is always in motion. The moon is moving away from the Earth with each year, and our planet gets further and further from the sun. You're also constantly on the move, even when you're standing perfectly still. White chocolate isn't really chocolate. It's made from sugar, milk products, vanilla, cocoa butter, and lecithin, but doesn't have chocolate solids in it. Cocoa butter is derived from cacao beans, which makes white chocolate a cousin of dark and milk chocolate, but not the closest relative or the same thing. Coffee won't stunt your growth. How tall you'll grow is genetic. A healthy diet can contribute to that too. Set your coffee consumption limit at 2 cups a day and you'll be fine. Wow, 2 cups? You don't need to wash chicken before you cook it. Doing it can spread germs onto your hands, work surfaces, clothing, and cooking supplies through splashes. Walnuts aren't really nuts. Neither are almonds, cashews, Brazil nuts, pecans, macadamia nuts, pistachios, or pine nuts. They're all formally seeds of drupes. They can't be called nuts, as they aren't fruits that have a single edible seed with an inedible outer shell. Diamonds aren't actually that rare. They're ordinary rocks, and extracting them isn't as complicated as it used to be 150 years ago. Marketing and advertising campaigns and artificially raised prices help them to become something considered luxury. Bulls don't get angry when you show them something red. They are red-green colorblind and can only see yellow, green, blue, and violet colors. Movement is what makes them angry and self-protective. So, try to look like a banana. Swimming right after a meal won't give you cramps. Your body needs some extra blood to digest food, but swimming won't revert it from the muscles in your arms and legs, messing up their work. Adding salt to water won't make it boil faster. The temperature of salt water will get higher faster than that of regular water, but the boiling point will also be higher, and salt adds some extra mass to it, so things won't speed up. Kangaroos can't walk backwards. They have muscular legs, big feet, and tails, and can move forward fast but can't go in the opposite direction because of this body construction. They're on the Australian coat of arms along with emus that can't move backward either, symbolizing that the country is always striving forward. Milk won't make your bones indestructible. It does have calcium and vitamin D in it, but no magical bone-healing powers. It is good with cookies. That is not a myth.
The ear-piercing sound of sirens brings your relaxing Saturday afternoon to a screeching halt. You jump out of the chair and run to the window. The sky is covered in black clouds all the way down to the horizon. The trees are nearly bent over flat from the gale-force winds. Together with the rain, golf ball-sized hail crashes into the ground, on rooftops, on parked cars. It sounds like a stampede right over your head. Car alarms are going off everywhere. Just then, crack! Huge bolts of lightning flash across the black sky. Then the monstrous grumble of thunder. Your heart jumps in your throat. As you peer through the window at the sudden chaos outside, you're filled with a primal fear of the power of nature. You snap back to reality. The sirens! Gotta get to the basement! You start to turn away from the window, and that's when you see it. A massive tornado ripping along the city street. It's throwing entire motorcycles, refrigerators, and even trees like baseballs. The roof of that building starts peeling off like a Band-Aid. The twister even lifts cars and pieces of asphalt as if they're made of feathers. It seems this tornado will flatten your city within an hour tops. You finally snap out of your hypnosis and run to the basement. The sound of the city being ripped apart terrifies you as you hunker down below as low as you can. But after about 20 minutes, everything is suddenly silent. You head out to see the clouds have disappeared, and the sun's rays illuminate the street. Luckily, your house was spared, but your modern city now looks more like ancient ruins. Stop. Tornadoes never come into cities, right? Yeah, they do. This monster doesn't care where it goes and what it eats along the way. While we're at it, you can forget about the myth that tornadoes will magically stop when they meet rivers, lakes, or mountains. They just keep on going. But about that no twisters in the city thing, about 1,000 tornadoes hit the US each year. That's 75% of all the tornadoes in the world. Most of these monsters occur in a strip, okay, more like a long blob, running up and down through the middle of the country. It's an area aptly dubbed Tornado Alley, a perfect spot for these things to form. You get cold, dry air coming down from Canada, meeting warm, humid air traveling north from the Gulf of Mexico. Warm air is less dense than cold air, so it rises and creates a strong updraft. Water droplets surround it to create the funnel cloud. There you go, recipe for a tornado. Now, if you closed your eyes, spun around, and put your finger on a map of the US, the chances of your finger landing on a major city are pretty slim. If you gathered all the cities in the whole country into one area, it would only be 3% of the US's entire land. Just like your finger, the likelihood of a tornado striking in the city is much smaller than landing in a rural area. When it comes down to it, tornadoes can touch down in big cities. They just hardly ever do, thanks to sheer chance. Another surprising myth. You always see a tornado coming because, funnel cloud right ahead. Not true. The approaching funnel can be completely camouflaged in a wall of rain. You might finally see it when it's right on top of you. In this case, you'd better trust your hearing. First, tornado warning sirens go off if you're in a place that has them. Second, listen for a loud rumble that sounds like a train coming. That's a sure sign this beast is somewhere nearby. Many people immediately start heading for shelter when they see green clouds in the sky, because we all believe it's the #1 sign of a tornado coming. Don't buy it. Yes, a green sky is a sign of a severe thunderstorm that's powerful enough to produce tornadoes, but it's not a guarantee like many people see it. While we're at it, you know how movies show the ground ripping apart during earthquakes? The gaping hole that swallows cars, houses, entire cities? Not a shred of truth to this. A crack may appear in the ground with major earthquakes, but it rarely exceeds a couple feet wide. One of the most overspread myths out there is that lightning will never strike the same place twice. Tell that to the Empire State Building. It gets hit by bolts of lightning at least 25 times a year. Pretty sure nobody's picking the building up and moving it to different locations. Yes, lightning likes really tall things, and it's not shy to keep coming back. As for that old warning about your cell phone or jewelry attracting lightning, busted. There hasn't been any scientific support for the idea that personal objects with metal in them attract lightning. You still shouldn't be out and about during a storm though, cell phone in hand or not. Now, if you're looking for a tsunami and only focused on giant walls of water, you might never see one, even if it's right in front of you. Tsunamis aren't always massive tidal waves crashing into the shore. More often than not, they look like the tide is rising extremely rapidly, receding and rising again until it overspills into the city. Not that tsunamis never form walls of water, it's just not as common. Picture Earth. Are you imagining a perfect ball? Well, to resemble the truth more, squash the poles down a little. There, now you have a realistic Earth. Scientists call the Earth an irregular sphere, or ellipsoid in fancy terms. The planet rotates on its axis, causing the equator to bulge out a bit, just like what happens when you spin fast on a merry-go-round. You feel pulled out and away from the center. What's the highest point on Earth? Everest, of course. But if we go from the point furthest away from the center of the Earth, the crown goes to Mount Chimborazo in the Andes. Its peak is actually 6,800 feet closer to space than the summit of Everest. That's because Chimborazo sits near the equator, where the planet's bulge is greatest. The blue whale weighs as much as 30 elephants, makes sounds louder than a jet, and eats 4 tons of food every day. It's the largest living creature this planet has ever seen. Only, not technically. Head to the Malheur National Forest in Oregon, home to a creature that weighs as much as 20 blue whales. The honey mushroom is a humongous fungus colony united into a common system. The giant covers an area of 1,500 football fields, and it's thousands of years old. Ask anyone to draw the sun, and they'll draw a happy yellow circle. But if you look at our star from the moon or the International Space Station, you'll see that it's actually white. From Earth, the sun looks yellow or red thanks to the atmosphere acting like a filter. Most people think time is constant and moves at the same speed no matter where you are. But the speed of time depends on how close the watch is to Earth. The weaker the gravity, the faster time passes. So the person living in the apartment above you is aging faster than you. Now, it's only 90 billionths of a second faster per 1 foot higher, so don't expect to notice a difference if you decide to move to the first floor. The ground under your feet feels pretty solid and whole. But in reality, the Earth's crust is all broken up into plates, surfing on oceans of liquid rock called magma. You don't feel it, but the ground under you is moving, a little over ½ an inch per year. That's about the same rate your toenails grow. Largest desert in the world? Easy, the Sahara. Nope, it's Antarctica, which is almost 2 times bigger than the Sahara. A desert isn't just a scorching, sandy place where it doesn't rain. It's a place with very little precipitation. So that includes snow too. In some parts of Antarctica, it hasn't rained or snowed for millions of years. In other parts, snow does fall, though rarely. Point is, there's a myth that it doesn't snow in extreme cold. Antarctica is the coldest place on Earth, and it snows there. There is some truth to this old saying. Cold is drier. It doesn't retain moisture as well. You need moisture to produce raindrops and snowflakes. That's why there are fewer chances for snowfall when temperatures drop so low.
A human year is not the same as a dog year. You might have thought that dogs age 7 times faster than we do, but it's not that simple. A dog that's been around for 1 year is, in fact, already 31. It will most likely even have its own little puppies running around. But here's where it gets tricky. 2 human years don't necessarily mean that your dog is 62 either. Your buddy will need to be around 4 in our years before it reaches old age. A 4-year-old dog will be 50, but a 7-year-old dog will be 62, and an 8-year-old dog will only be 64. So, they age faster, but also slower and slower as time passes by. The next time you're celebrating your best bud's birthday, be sure to put lots of candles on the cake and buy even more presents than you normally would. A common misconception is that dogs are colorblind. They're not, but they don't see color exactly as we do. They have trouble distinguishing between their reds and greens. It all just looks like a mash of gray, brown, blue, and even yellowy tones. That's because their eyes lack one of 3 photoreceptors needed to perceive colors fully. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. Wrong. Because of their old age, they might need more persistence from you, but it's not impossible. The key here is to be as positive as you can. If you see they're not feeling up to it right now, that's okay. Let them rest, and in a little bit, you can pick the training session back up. Reward still needs to be a big part of the whole ordeal. After Max successfully speaks, give it its favorite biscuit. Then, it'll speak on command whenever you ask it to. That dog has shoes on. They might seem unnecessary, but today the weather's 90 degrees outside. Imagine walking with your bare feet on asphalt during this heat. You'd feel like you're stepping on lava, and so would your pup. Some dogs are better equipped to handle different weather conditions, but dog shoes can prevent your little buddy from harming its paws. It's the same during winter. When it's freezing cold, you wouldn't just walk around without a jacket on, so make sure your buddy is warm too. Dogs with a lot of fur don't need to get their hair cut to feel lighter. They have what's called an undercoat. In winter, it gets thicker, which gives your buddy an extra layer of protection from the cold. Then, during springtime, your dog will shed some of its fur. It's that same undercoat that will keep your dog comfy during hotter days. When you shave a dog's fur, the new one coming in might get curly or entangled. It might just be better to leave it as is. You can also find different alternatives to keep them cool. Keep it in the shade when they're out, and always bring a bottle of cold water with you, so your buddy's always refreshed. At home, you can put damp towels for them to lie on. If you have a garden, you can also turn its sprinklers on and let Max run free. It'll exercise and have lots of fun. Not all dogs are great swimmers, but all dogs love swimming. If yours can't swim all that well, it might be because it has a bulky chest and a large flat head. In fact, it might not even be able to stay afloat. Get it a swimming vest designed especially for dogs. Some people might say a slightly open window is enough to keep a dog in the car. This isn't true, because after spending just a few minutes in a heated or cold car might mean severe health implications for your best friend. Some states even let you let a dog out of the car if you see it in there, to let it breathe. If your dog can't stand mail carriers, it might be because it's trying to protect you. They bark because they're trying to alert you, their pack leader, that the vicious mail carrier is coming. You can fix this by introducing them to one another. This way, your dog will recognize them as a friend and not a villain. Unlike you, your dog isn't yawning because it's sleepy. Yawning is a way for them to show anxiety. If it doesn't like cats and there's one around, it could yawn. Or maybe there's a new person in the house and Max isn't feeling comfortable in their presence. Or you take your dog to a play date, but they're not getting along. Max keeps yawning because he's getting upset. Yawning is also a way to show you it's running out of patience. It might be time for both of you to leave. Dogs eat grass when they're sick, but this isn't always the case. Catching your dog eating grass when you've been talking to your friend for way longer than you should have probably means it's just bored. They do it to be rebellious too, or just because it's fun. It won't be a problem if the grass isn't treated. Either way, just make sure it doesn't eat too much of it. Otherwise, head out to the vet. Even a little bit of chocolate is poisonous for your pup and should be kept hidden away at all times. This includes cocoa powder and baker's chocolate. This applies to cats too. If you suspect that your pet has eaten a large amount of chocolate, take it to the vet's office immediately. Well-trained dogs will do what they're supposed to and obey commands, but don't think they'll never bite you. It can act out of emotion. Imagine your dog's scared. You've put it in an uncomfortable situation with lots of new faces. This has been going on for a while, and Max isn't able to control his emotions anymore. So, a new person tries to reach it to give it a pet and gets punished. Nothing harsh, but it was unexpected. Maybe it felt like it needed to be defensive. Thinking they're protecting and guarding you is another reason why a dog might bite. Or if they're feeling too intimidated by whoever it might be. You've got two dogs and you're about to enter your house. One of them is waiting for you in its bed. It doesn't make a big whoop about it rather than wagging its tail. The other one comes running to the door. It whimpers, jumps, and wags its whole body while running in circles around you. This doesn't mean it loves you more. It just means it's not properly trained yet. Tail wagging doesn't always mean your dog is excited. You can observe a dog's tail to understand what it's feeling. If it holds its tail high but isn't moving it, it's alert but also trying to assert its leadership. Still held high, the tail is moving now. It means the feeling's changed a bit. It's alert but happy. It's still trying to show it's the boss here. But at least it's feeling excited now. When its tail is between the legs, your dog's feeling afraid. Or, if there's an alpha dog around, it might mean your buddy admits its leadership. A tail that's held straight out means the dog is taking in new information, feeling the room. It's not reacting though, it'll stay neutral while doing this. If a dog's tail is wagging fast, it means excitement. The faster they wag their tail, the more excited they are. A slow wag conveys insecurity. It might be because of another dog or person. Now, imagine your dog is wagging its entire body. You even see its hips wagging. This means it's friendly. It might happen when you're in the elevator, and it spots its best friend from the apartment complex. The worst wag of them all is an extremely fast vertical wagging tail. When doing this, your dog can be mean to others. It might be feeling territorial over you. It's best to remove yourself from the situation. If your dog's tail is wagging to the right, it means it's more relaxed. And a left wagging tail means stress.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.